Yes, there's some on-table items you'll see in your agenda package, mostly relating to item 4.1, the speculation tax. There's items R through AB. It's just the last 2 pages I'd like to bring your attention to. Unfortunately, I missed writing the item number on the second to last page, and that item is 11.1A on table.
Okay.
That was email from Maureen.
That is the email from Maureen.
It's the resolution. That's the email.
No, that is the email, and then the next page is the resolution.
No, the next page is Melanie's.
Yeah.
And the last page is Melanie's 11.3A. She's indicated 11.3.
Okay.
And, sorry, what is Maureen's again?
11.1A.
1A.
Those. Okay, motion to adopt agenda, seconded. All in favor? That is passed. So, public comments, Tyler. Who have we got today? How many do we have?
We have 7 on the list.
Okay.
First up is Mr. David Bridge, please.
Okay. Now, we've only got 15 minutes, so if I could ask you to please try to keep it to just a couple of minutes. I think we have a pretty good idea of what people are going to say. Please, join us, David.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Council, I would only like to suggest that this tax proposed is so undefined at the moment that I would ask Council seriously consider asking for an exemption from it until at least the government has explained exactly how they want to apply this tax. Your decision later on is up to you, of course, but I think it should be delayed until we find out what the tax is going to be. Thank you very
Can I
much.
ask a question of clarification?
Certainly.
David, are you saying to delay our decision or ask the,
Ask the government to exclude Bowen Island
Thank you.
until you find out what they actually are going to do.
Right.
Thank you very much.
That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas Ray.
Mayor, members of council, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I'm here on behalf of the Hood Point Householders Society. I've been here before. I am the chair of the board. Just to give you some quick background, given the time, Bowen Island, or Hood Point, was originally developed starting in 1928. And today there's some, I believe, 85 residences there, 75 to 80% of which are recreational properties. Most of these recreational properties, in fact, I would say virtually all of them, are multi-generational. My family, for example, first purchased property there in 1945-46, right after the war, and we are now on our 4th generation. And we are typical of the residents, recreational property owners there. The society was incorporated in 1953 with the stated purpose of preserving the residential character of the neighborhood, of the community. And in pursuit of that, I'm sure many of you are aware, just going to the speculative aspect of it, the society and its members have purchased large pieces of property which are called common property or owned by the society, where all recreational facilities are in that central block. They also have a lease, a 99-year lease of 2260, the adjoining district lot. Both of those parcels have been downzoned. They're green zones, and they cannot and will never be developed. The point I want to make is that these property owners are not speculators, clearly not speculators. And the concern of many members, indeed 2 of my board members have already expressed to me that such a tax will simply make these properties unaffordable. We, as a community, do not oppose a speculation tax, a proper speculation tax. But it is just that in its application, insofar as it applies to the Hood Point and this island generally, the net has been just cast too far. Our society's members are very, very concerned And I must say that surely the government did not intend to include such recreational properties, which are a very significant part of not only the Hood Point community, but of this island's history and its way of life, its culture. The government's intention is clear when you see some of the exclusions or exemptions that have already been granted. And as Jordan Sturdy pointed out, with respect to Howe Sound, the islands that are caught are Bowen Island, Passage Island, and Boyer Island. If I had the good fortune of owning a property in Gambier or Keats Island or Paisley Island, I would not be caught. So in that respect, I think it's unfair and arbitrary as well. And as the last speaker, I would hope that the Bowen Island municipality, again on behalf of the society and its members, will adopt the same course as has been done by West Kelowna and the regional district of Nanaimo, and I urge you to seek an exemption from this tax.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jan Mackey, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, I'm Janet Mackey. I want to tell you about the most precious piece of property, the most precious thing that I own. It's a piece of waterfront property to the south end of Capes Bay. In our mid-30s, my husband and I decided it would be such an adventure to find a weekend place on an island near Vancouver where we could run away to on the weekends. And it took a couple of years. We looked on Bowen, we looked on Gulf Islands, etc. And a piece of property came up, a beautiful piece of property with a tiny cabin on it that had been built as a weekend residence. And we bought it. And we were so excited. We were young and it was hard. But we found the money and we did it. Some years later, an adjoining piece of forest came up for sale, and because there was a group of about 15 families or whatever, religious organisation, whatever it was, were looking to purchase this piece of property right next to our magic place, we thought we have to get in here and buy it. And again, another huge struggle, but we managed to buy it. Happily, after almost 25 years, this piece of property is still in its natural state. Nobody has ripped down the trees or whatever else. So who would know that 40 years later, what has always been my precious piece of property now, according to BC Assessment, is a very valuable piece of land with a little cabin on it worth $100,000. With the income speculation tax, and I hope it doesn't come in, we will be expected to pay $55,000 a year in speculation tax. We've no idea how this suddenly could happen to us. We're in our mid-70s, and we thought we had everything planned out and taken care of. Real estate was different years ago. Who would think that prices would go so crazy? I don't think we were speculating. I don't even think we were investing. We just found a magic place where stress was not allowed. We never allowed ourselves to bring any work over the water. Never. It was banned. The stress level these past few weeks has been enormous. And who knew that stress would come from this side of the water? But I don't have the power to ban that tax. But you, Bowen Island Council, have the power to apply for an exemption. And I hope you can find it in your hearts and in your conscience to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. John Lawrence.
Mayor and Council, thanks for this opportunity to address...
Please have a seat, John.
Oh, would you prefer me to sit down?
Yes.
You're addressing the mayor and council.
Happy to do that. We own a small pied-à-terre in the city, and we own a vacant parcel here on Bowen Island. So we're subject to this speculation tax twofold, and it will cost us more than $55,000. to pay on an annual basis. So if you factor that over 10 years, we will have paid to the government over $500,000. This is clearly not a tax that the government anticipates that people can pay. The objective here is for people to sell. That has very significant implications for Bowen Island, a market that becomes flooded with new property, depresses property values, reduces property taxes, reduces the impact on the local economy of all those people who would have formerly supported it through restaurant purchases, visits to the local general store, and so on and so forth. So what happens here is you will have a large number of unsold properties just awaiting the speculators, the carpetbaggers, that this tax is designed to eliminate. So I will just re-emphasize, like the previous speakers, that it would be a very good thing and a very smart thing for this council to seek exemption. And on the point of exemption, one wonders how these categories of exemption came into being. I find it very disturbing that the one place that would attract the kind of speculators that they're trying to kill is Whistler. And Whistler is exempt. I smell a rat.
Mr. John O'Donnell.
Your Worship, members of council, I'm John O'Donnell at 1829 Arbutus Point Road. I'm actually here first to read a letter on behalf of Donna Sinclair, who's at 726 Arbutus Place. Donna unfortunately couldn't be here, but she feels very much concerned about this, so she wrote this letter for me to read. I am a senior living on my own, and I'm very upset the NDP and Green Party are choosing to penalize BC residents for having recreational property as a second home. I've been going to Bowen for many years, first as a renter in the Orchard, cabin number 8, from 1965 to 1975, then as a family member at my daughter's home in Tunstall Bay, 1987 to 90, and finally owning a small 720 square foot cabin in Bowen Bay in 1991. Another link to Bowen is that my great-grandfather was the chief engineer on the Union steamship boat to Bowen around 1910. I worked for many years, brought up a family, and contributed to the BC economy, and now the government wants me to tax me even more in my senior years. Why? How can this help the housing shortage in Vancouver? That's what this is all about. I feel working in my yard has helped me stay healthy and has kept me out of a care home. I'm not a speculator. I travel back and forth from an apartment in Vancouver every week. Bowen is not a summer home. I've always thought I would be traveling to Bowen until I was no longer able to drive. Now I hope this doesn't change. I will sadly have to sell my little cabin if this speculation tax goes through. Donna Sinclair. And then as John O'Donnell, I just make a few comments. The issue for Donna, of course, is she can't defer the tax. So the normal response to these extra taxes is seniors can defer them, but of course in a second home you can't. And when you're a senior and a fixed pension income, even $5,000 or $8,000 a year is a major hit. Another point is we have to be mindful of the unintended consequences. That's what always hits us with these very bizarre taxes. Because when you think of it, most taxes are formulated in private. They can't consult widely with industry because then it gets out of the bag. So they're formulating these taxes in a very small group, or relying on a professor at UBC living in faculty and staff housing. And they really can't bear down and have committee representation to find these consequences. I work in the development industry in Vancouver, and through UDI I sit in a number of committees where they're bringing in changes in the Strata Property Act. They have a committee, we sit and talk about it. We just, we're not having our own personal issues at stake, we're just saying, okay, if you do this, this will be an unintended consequence. The trouble with tax law is they can't do that. So one of the main one, of course, is, as has been mentioned earlier, is the sell-off, sudden sell-off of property. So even if 10% of the 800 to 1,000 properties involved are listed in a year, that would just have a huge impact on the market values in Bowen. And then if that does cause values to drop dramatically, which I suppose is the intent of the tax, anyone who's a resident with the mortgage is really exposed, because suddenly their mortgage may be more than 75% of the value of the home, and the bank may not renew the mortgage. So existing homeowners are really quite vulnerable. And also because of this tax, of course, there'll be a lack of buyers. So again, with the sudden flurry of listings and a lack of buyers, you can sort of picture what it'll do to values. Bowen is quite unusual compared to a lot of municipalities. The ratio of speculation tax applicable properties to non-tax properties is extremely large. So if we were in Vancouver or Burnaby, there are a lot of properties owned by offshore people, but the ratio, if we discovered that they brought in the foreign buyers tax, is quite low. I mean, last year the empty homes tax in Vancouver only recovered about 5% of the homes, so there's the surprise. Whereas in Bowen, the ratio would be very high. So again, you can picture, a huge impact on the residents of Bowen. And finally, and I know we've got an issue here with the park, but we're only in this pickle because we're a member of Metro. And when you think about it, the issues of Metro are so different than Bowen's. Look, for instance, I attended a workshop last year because Metro is planning to regulate and eventually ban wood-burning fireplaces. So Burnaby, Vancouver, it makes great sense, but Bowen, not really. We all know that the environmental impact of burning wood is the same as having it decaying in the woods. They both release the same amount of carbon into the atmosphere. So in Bowen, we rely on wood-burning fireplaces. There are particular issues in some parts of Bowen, but really not a big deal. Same with this speculation tax, I'll wrap up, is we're only in this pickle because we're a member of Metro. And if there were some way to finance the park differently, maybe we should consider leaving Metro, because more of these issues are coming through in Metro. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Dave Mackey, please.
Good morning, members of council, Mr. Mayor. I'm having to hack my little speech that I was going to do, because basically people before me have said a lot of the same stuff, so it's going to be a bit disjointed, but I'll persevere. This is not a speculation tax. It's a money grab. We all know that. It's either trying to shake the tree and get as much money, or trying to get people to sell their properties to make residential properties available. This might make sense in Metro Vancouver. It doesn't make a lot of sense on Bowen Island. It's a cruel tax, and it's really an investment tax, and we've already got one of those, and it's called a capital gains tax. Whether by intent or accident, locally on Bowen, this tax is going to capture two groups. The first group, people like us, part-timers, so-called recreational property owners, who've owned property for years, decades, sometimes generations, but we have our principal residents off island. And the second group, which is not really well represented, are people who have decided to retire to Bowen Island and retain a small apartment or condo on the mainland, so they can avail themselves of a full list of cultural events or financial facilities, or more importantly, medical facilities. I know people here that actually own a small property on the North Shore, and they use it regularly to make regular visits to Lions Gate. These people, even if Bowen is excluded, are still going to be hurting. This tax is really, it's wrong-minded, it's not been thought out, and it's mean. And we have to protest it. A majority of these people that the tax is going to impact, both full-time and part-time, can't afford the extra $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year that this tax will demand. Many of us are seniors, we're retired and we're on fixed incomes, and the so-called non-refundable tax credit that the government is talking about is not going to be available to us because our incomes are going to be quite low. And for example, our tax bill, you've already heard from my wife, is $55,000 a year under this tax. Our non-refundable tax credit would be between 4 and 5. So we've only got to find another $50,000 a year, to stay on board. The net result of all this, as you heard from other people, is a lot of people, whether they like it or not, are having to consider selling their property on Bowen. There's going to be considerable heartache and hardship over the next few months if this happens to a lot of people on Bowen Island. The long-range impact to the island, the community and the economy could be really drastic. Many properties could come up for sale. Many retirees will be leaving the island. A lot of these people provide, they avail themselves as volunteers to the island. You can see that. We've talked about property values. There's going to be even more stress on Bowen business, which is always stressed. I was talking to a friend of mine who's what you might call some type of financial analyst, and we were talking about the tax, and as we got into details, once he started to comprehend what was happening, he says, my God, this could ruin the smaller communities. And he's right. Bowen's a small community. It might work in Metro Vancouver, but Bowen is a very different community. It could have an absolutely radical effect on this island. It could be the biggest thing that this island has seen in the last 30 or 40 years. And we've seen some big things with Roger Curtis, Cowan Point, the park and so on, but this could be even bigger than that. Just to touch on our properties, one thing I know for sure, if we have to sell, it's not going to be first-time home buyers that are going to be looking at our properties. The little panel boat that we have, first thing that anybody's going to do with that is get rid of it, and a big house will be built on it. The lovely bit of forest that we have next door, that we have a tree that's probably 250, 300 years old, that'll come down, they'll clear cut that property and another big house will go on it. And as a previous speaker said, the kind of people that this is going to attract, all of this available land, waterfront and what have you, are the very speculators that the tax is aimed at getting rid of and controlling. It's ridiculous. One of Bowen's major problems, of course, is available affordable housing. This is not going to help that one bit. It's going to attract the wrong kind of people. Premier John Horgan has said that Finance Minister Carol James is going to be tweaking this tax over the next little while. Well, A, I've never trusted governments, and B, I don't know what they're going to do as far as tweaking it is concerned. I think it's far too risky for the municipality to take a kind of wait-and-see attitude. I think we've got to kind of present our concerns and let them know how ridiculous this tax is. So the regional district of Nanaimo, the city of Kelowna, and the district of West Kelowna have all requested exclusion from the tax. My wife and I strongly urge the Mayor and Council to write to the Minister and voice our concerns about this tax. And please protect this island and its community and request exclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bruce Russell.
Thank you, Council. Bruce Russell, 303 Robert Road, which has been a property in the family since the late 1920s. Our family invested in property at Bowen for lifestyle reasons. It was not driven by speculation. In fact, I'm sure that Webster did not even have the word speculation in his dictionary at the time that our properties were purchased. I need not repeat all of the very, very good reasons why this tax is so ill-conceived. In fact, I think if the government attempted to ill-conceive a tax, they couldn't have done a better job. And by way of analogy, I liken it to a gangster who goes into a restaurant to shoot his intended target, misses him completely and kills everybody else in the restaurant. And this is the type of collateral damage that is being created, not only to Bowen Island, but all of the arbitrary selected target areas. A couple of the reasons that I don't think have been talked about very much for people like ourselves having lifestyle alternative properties is A, for health reasons. I think at age 76, and I will take a second from the council if you'd like, I'm in pretty damn good health. I'm very active. I give a hell of a lot to this community because I love it passionately. And I think one of the reasons why I'm able to do that and choose to do that is because of the dual lifestyle I live. Part of it in Vancouver and part of it on Bowen Island. And if that type of a lifestyle can keep me out of the doctor's office, away from the special consultant's office, off of medications, and out of hospitals, I think the government should be very thankful for that, rather than trying to penalize us with this goofy wealth or lifestyle tax. And the other thing I think that's important to remember from a small community, and I appreciate what the former speakers have said, is that look at what dual property owners do for this community in the way of making donations to a whole wide range of much needed public initiatives. If we're going to have a tax rammed down our throats, a lot of us have limited disposable income. And I can assure you, if the choice is to voluntarily make a donation versus gagging on the necessity of having to pay the tax should we choose not to sell the property, you know what the decision will be. So therefore, in conclusion, I strongly encourage council to write a letter to Finance Minister Carol James, Premier John Horgan, like other municipalities have done. I would ask you to make sure that letter contains passion and strength and request that we be excluded from the arbitrarily chosen targeted areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, we have one more speaker, Mr. Andrew Stone.
Good morning, Mayor and Council and staff. 734 Arbutus Place. I'm here to talk about not the tax that everyone else has been talking about, but the Islands Trust levy that's been brought down and approved in their budget. I was just doing some quick number crunching late last night, and just as a sort of to lay the ground here, back in 2012-13 budget, our levy was 165,000 and change. Now there's it's issued at 293,000, so 165, 293 in the space of 5-6 years. And I just did some quick thumbnail costs here. So it looks like it's around a night that we're paying, if you take our the average tax with the 8% increase put on for this year, like this is just, you know, spitballing figures here, it works out to about 19.7% of our tax fee is to Islands Trust now. So that's based on, you know, Allison or somebody can do the calculations. I'm basing it on the numbers that I'm familiar with. So I know that the tax roll has increased and so on, but it's going to be in that neighborhood. So, and to the average household, it's going to cost $2.57 a week. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, we're looking at a 56% increase since 2012. If if our property assessments continue on this trajectory in relation to the Gulf Islands, we're going to be looking at double, in the next 5 years to what we were paying in 2012. So I guess what I want to know is, and you can talk about this, Allison and Sue, when you give your reports. When the fee went in 2012 to 2013, it bumped up from 165 to 233,000. Was there any discussion that you had with the Islands Trust about trying to figure out a way out of this issue that you're in? Allison knows this very well. The legislation states that the way that our calculation is done, and I'm just saying this in a general way, is that based on property assessments, our property assessments versus the rest of the Islands Trust, they figure out a percentage and then we give that fee, or Islands Trust issues a requisition for a certain amount. So obviously our property assessments have gone way up in relation to the rest of the islands and the Islands Trust. So knowing that, that you were in this predicament and that it was going to continue, was there any conversations or efforts made to try and figure out a solution to this, like going to Victoria and hammering out a new arrangement or some other way? Because we can't sustain this kind of this cost increase year over year. Something has to be done. It's getting to the point now where it's actually making a real dent in the way that we can spend our tax money. Thank you very much.
Just a point of clarification on that. I think if Andrew's saying $257 a week, that's $133 a year per household on something like a $4,000 or $5,000 bill. So percentage-wise, it's
well, it's like a house. I'm guessing like a house that would sell or is assessed in the $700,000 to $800,000 range would be. That's how I base my calculations.
okay. I just you had come up with a 19.7% figure that I didn't quite understand. I just wanted to give a little bit of clarification there.
So $134 with a tax after rebate and so on, a tax bill of around $26.50.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. I didn't want to get into too
Sure.
deeply into the details on it, but I just felt the need to say something. Okay.
Mayor? Sorry, I'm over here.
Hello.
What are you doing over there?
I know, before we get into the consent agenda, Councilor Mason would like to call in, so I'm just going to dial her, if that's all right.
Okay.
Hello, Councilor Mason?
Hello?
I think she might have hung up.
Okay, I'm giving it a shot.
Didn't even ring.
Hi, Tyler.
Hello, Councilor Mason, you're on the speakerphone.
What?
You are on the speakerphone.
Can you hear us okay, Melanie?
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, you're on the speakerphone and we can hear you.
Hi, Melanie.
Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
Can you hear everything all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so consent agenda. Items to be pulled. Yes, Sue.
I'd like to pull 3.7
Okay.
and 3.17.
Okay.
3.7 and 3.17.
We don't have it.
Okay, the one about the
Cold water.
water treatment plant? Yeah.
3.17.
Okay.
Pardon me.
3.17. Yeah, sorry.
Pardon me. Yes.
Okay. Fair enough. Anything else?
3.16.
3.16. Okay, and anything else? Yes?
I'm trying to find the minutes of the Parks and Trails Committee is 313, and where's the Economic Development Committee? Oh, maybe it's 318.
3208.
And Economic Development is 3.2.
Sorry, so 3.18 as well?
Yeah, I just have questions.
Okay, 3.18 and
3.2B.
3.2E.
3.20.
20. Okay. Okay, anything else? Okay, motion to adopt the consent agenda. And seconded, all in favor, that is passed. Okay, thank you. Now, we are on to new business. Mayor Steels. Oh, yeah. Proposed provincial speculation tax. The recommendation is that council request Mayor Steels to write the Minister of Finance requesting that Bowen Island Municipality be exempted from the announced speculation tax. I could have that motion. And then the seconder. Okay, speak to it before I call the question. It's almost obvious that the negative impact that this would have on the community. You can measure it in so many different ways. There are so many different metrics that can be applied to it. Besides the sort of basic injustice of the whole thing, and the lack of careful thought, and there's the unintended consequences, there's also the fear of the intended consequences, right? And that, I don't want to sound too inflammatory, but it's kind of starting a class warfare. Not to sound too inflammatory. But I agree that it's a real, potentially a very, very big issue for us. Even from the municipality's point of view, it will really damage our work on developing affordable housing on the island. We're working with BC Housing on an affordable housing project. They're awaiting funding from the provincial government. We want to, through our affordable housing reserve fund that we're setting up, we want to top that amount up so that we can leverage quite a few more affordable units. The money to top that up is supposed to come from us selling an area we call Area 1 that is for basically a high-density condo development, which will be the first on the island. The difficulty that we run into there is the financiers trying to determine the selling price of the units. We do this in Vancouver, and the guys will flip off that formula in 30 seconds and say, well, this is what's going to sell for it, this is how much you can borrow. Try to do it on Bowen Island, it gets to be a much more difficult equation to work out. And anything that introduces uncertainty in our real estate market has a pretty big implication to that. It's similar to the idea of what happens if values go down and then people can't qualify for remortgaging and that sort of thing. So I think I guess my point is there's a myriad of large issues here, and trying to formulate a letter that is going to capture everything. I'm just really hoping that in the next day or two they announce that they're going to exempt us and we won't have to go through this entire exercise. But be assured that I'm very prepared to go through it, and it will be passionate, it will be strong. So I just wanted to say that to the people in the audience. Sue Ellen.
I just wanted to let everybody know, including council, that the chair of the Islands Trust has also written to Minister Carol James, and it's not only Bowen who will be affected, it's the other islands in the Islands Trust that are within the Capital Regional District. So that's Gabriola, Galliano, Maine, North Pender, South Pender, Salt Springs, Saturna, and he mentions Bowen. And so I just wanted to bring your attention to that. That's another good letter, and I believe that's going to be included in this agenda if anybody wants to look it up, or you can see it on the Islands Trust website. At the end, he includes a paragraph that I would love to echo, if possible, that something that Bowen Island Municipality welcomes working with the province on affordable housing solutions that work for Bowen.
Yes. And Maureen?
I'm not altogether comfortable with the recommendation as proposed, and that's not because I think that we should not ask for an exemption. I think a lot of the correspondence that we've received has pointed out that it's not a good proposed tax. It's unfair. And when you ask for an exemption from something that is unfair, you're not addressing the root cause of the problem, which is the unfairness of the speculation tax. You're basically shifting it to another jurisdiction. I have some concerns about the unintended consequences of Bowen Island being exempted from the speculation tax and being the only municipality within Metro Vancouver that is exempted. I think that that would also have very significant impacts on our community. So to be clear, I think that it would be better for us as a council to ask that the province not proceed with the announced speculation tax. And in the alternative, if the province does proceed with the speculation tax, then that Bowen Island be exempted. But I think the first ask should be for the province not to proceed with that. And in doing so, in making that ask, we're pointing to the fundamental problem with the speculation tax itself.
I actually have no problem with that. I think the intention of putting this on the agenda was to make it very clear, probably clear to our audience, that we were going to write strongly to object to the implications and everything mentioned to the tax. I actually agree, I think with Councillor Nicholson, that it's just a, excuse my language, just a darn bad tax. And you could look at the way Kelowna expressed it in its final part of their presentation. It said simply scrap the tax. I would have no problem if, for the sake of writing this letter, we adjusted the wording to say, if we can't scrap the tax, and that's target 1, then get us out of this tax, that's target 2. However, we still have to remember that if we get ourselves out, it solves a significant part of this problem. What it doesn't solve is the people already mentioned, by the way, who have small condominiums on the North Shore for various reasons, and it often applies, I choose my words with care, to an aging part of this population. So really, tax has got to go, because if we tinker with it, I'm not sure we do ourselves any favour. And however we write our letter, I'm actually would actually support the fact that the onus is to get rid of this appalling tax, because otherwise what we're doing is mechanics on an appalling tax, and we just end up with a revised appalling tax, and that gives greater concerns.
Yeah, fair enough.
Just in short, it was, we're asking for a tweak and we need a rethink.
All right. Gary?
I tend to agree with Maureen. I think we tried to get rid of this tax altogether because it wasn't well thought out. They just threw it out there to see if it would stick. And speaking of sticks, I think you really got to bring out the ugly stick on this one. I mean, and I think some of the examples that came out of the public today should be in the letter for sure, about people losing their homes that that they've had for years and years. And it's going to be, besides the economic impact on it, it's going to be crazy.
In our 3.5 years of sitting here, there's a slight difference between the reaction to this and the reaction to some other things that caused a lot of emotion, because people, take strong sides. Here, the difference I notice is not just the emotion, but the really real concern. This is a particularly cruel and vindictive act on individuals, and you can see the level of personal concerns. And again, not wishing to politicize this, but it's going to hit this party at the ballot box very badly, because it's separating a certain group, and this is a voting group.
very discriminatory.
And if they realise what power they have as a voting group, this group, they're going to make significant difference to the political landscape of this province. And I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad, because it's not an appropriate venue for me to do that. But it is going to be a fact. So, if they want to lose a whole ton of votes, they're sure going down the right way about it. If they want to pump up a BC Liberal fighting fund, they've just done it.
Okay, and on that note, we'll...
Can I just make a comment, please?
Yes, certainly.
Just very short, I just would like to comment that I do support Councillor Nicholson's comments, and that I don't support the proposed tax as it's currently written.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion before we take the question?
Could I propose the amendment?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That council requests Mayor Skills to write the Minister of Finance requesting that the province not proceed with the announced speculation tax. Alternatively, if the tax proceeds, that Bowen Island Municipality be exempted from the tax.
Okay. Second the amendment.
A tax
Consider
can't
that the-
proceed, the province proceeds with the tax.
Okay.
Can I add an amendment to that?
Hold on, let's just get this
We'll deal with
first.
this one first, Melanie, and then come to you.
Okay, so alternative, if the province proceeds with the tax. Alternatively, if the province proceeds with the tax as proposed, that Bowen Island be exempted from the tax. You okay with that, Alison?
Yeah, Bowen Island Municipality,
Bowen Island Municipality.
because we've got 3 islands.
Right, okay. And Melanie, what were your thoughts?
So I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was caught. I just would like to say that we don't go ahead with the speculation tax as proposed.
Okay,
Correct.
yes.
That's
Yes,
in there.
I believe that we've captured.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's a friendly amendment. Do I seconder for it? And it's,
Okay, let's
It's
just read
okay
it aloud
with
once more.
okay.
That council requests Mayor Skills to write the Minister of Finance requesting that the province not proceed with the speculation tax. Alternatively, if the province proceeds with the tax, that Bowen Island Municipality be exempted from the tax.
Okay.
And that the letter be copied to our MLA and the Premier. And the Chair of Islands Trust. And the Chair of Islands Trust.
I thought we had wording in there that says as proposed.
Yeah. From the proposed speculation
We
tax?
used the word announced speculation tax, was what was in the original resolution.
Okay.
Do you want to read it once more, Tyler?
It's not legislation.
That council requests Mayor Skills to write to the Minister of Finance requesting that the province not proceed with the announced speculation tax. Alternatively, if the province proceeds with the tax, that Bowen Island Municipality be exempted.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd like to propose one further amendment, is just to add on to the end, and that we welcome working with the province on affordable housing solutions. Or will you just take that?
No, that's
That's going to be covered off in the letter because we're already working with them.
Okay.
Right.
I just don't want that to be,
No, it's a key part of our message as to why this is so devastating for us.
Sorry, there was one additional part was writing letters. It was to the MLA,
Copies to
copies to the MLA, who else? There was-
Islands Trust
Chair.
and the Premier.
And then Minister of Finance.
Can we do that as a
So it's
separate thing so that that doesn't show as part of our resolution in our, because.
Yeah, we can do that separately.
Yeah, so that I don't want, we're gonna say
You're gonna
council
quote the
passed this
resolution.
resolution,
Yeah,
and I don't want to
okay,
quote a bunch
yeah.
of stuff at the bottom of it.
Makes sense.
So make that as a,
You
copies
can
be
just
sent
do
to the
it.
appropriate
You
parties.
can
Suggest we
just
don't
do-
need that by
Yeah.
resolution.
No, right. We
Any
will-
more
we
than
will
that,
send
more
it-
than one. Yeah.
We will send it out to everybody in there. Might listen. Okay. Okay, so, can I call the question on the resolution as amended? Okay, all in favor? Okay, and that's passed unanimously.
Melanie?
Melanie?
Oh,
Yeah, in favor.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
So from a process perspective, can we see the draft of the letter before it goes out?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. In fact, I will want you to. Because this is not Well, I want your help on it too, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Really hard to know how to augment and correlate all the footnotes that you mentioned. There are literally hundreds of letters.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and it's a matter of how much detail do you want to go into? Because it could be a
There's room in the
12-page
parking
letter.
lot now. There's room in the parking lot now.
Okay.
Go back to our findings.
Okay, next up on the agenda is Councillor Nicholson Community Engagement Program on the community lands.
So you have in your agenda package a copy of an outline for the community engagement program that's proposed for the community lands. This came out of discussion with the communications coordinator, Councillor Fast, Mayor Scales, and CAO Lalonde, and Manager of Planning and Development, Daniel Martin, and also some feedback from the joint subcommittee, I guess it is, of the Advisory Planning Committee and the Mayor's Standing Committee. So I think it's fairly self-explanatory, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or concerns that you would like to express.
Okay, so, let me get back to, so this, we've got a housing charrette being planned or something for housing. Are these going to be two different public engagement events?
Yes.
Because I thought we were talking about June for that too, so I'm confused.
We have an engagement weekend that's on the 9th and 10th of June that's planned, and its focus is not solely housing. Its focus is on the community lands as a whole. So
But when we had to talk about housing and the housing process, I thought we were having a 2-day focus meeting on how we were going to address affordable housing.
the focus of the engagement event has shifted somewhat, in part because the consideration of housing on the community lands could mean that people were not thinking in terms of all of the other potential uses for the lands, and there are a significant number, including the health center and the fire hall. So there is a shift in focus. The housing speaker series is continuing, and there are events that are planned for that.
So there will be a discussion about housing
at the community at that weekend?
Okay,
Yes.
so...
Sorry, I'm having difficulty getting my agenda up here.
So the wording is public engagement events, 2-day public engagement event on the community land.
Yes.
On the uses for the community lands, including housing?
Yeah.
Would make me more comfortable.
Yeah, okay.
On the uses for the community land, the uses including housing for the community lands.
Okay.
Well, we've got them.
And the resolution, where's that page gone? Just says that council endorsed the proposed community engagement program on the community lands as presented in the report for the March 19th, or March, what is today, March 26th council meeting. As presented in the report dated March 18th.
So that is the resolution.
Yeah, no, but the resolution has to, when it stands on its own, refer to the report presented today.
Ah, I see.
So I'm just fiddling with wording because I have no idea. Somebody could look at this code and
Got it.
pull out a different.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the recommendation then is that council endorse the proposed community engagement program on the community lands presented at the March 26th council meeting.
It said the council endorse the proposed community engagement program on the uses of community lands, including housing,
Well, I
as
was
presented? Is that what you mean?
No, the uses of community lands was to go in the second bullet on the public engagement event. So 2-day public engagement event, June 9-10, on the uses of the community lands.
Can somebody read that? I think I'm looking at the wrong thing.
216, yeah. 316.
So item 6.1 is the council endorse the proposed community engagement program on the community lands presented at the March 26th council meeting. And what Alison was suggesting was that in the document itself, it be clear that it's for the uses of the community lands, including housing.
So as presented and amended.
As presented and amended. Happy with those revisions. So I'd like to move the recommendation.
Okay, and seconded. Yeah, I'd like to speak to it before we call the question. And that is keep in mind that what we've done here now is we've blended 3 processes. Right? We have a process for rezoning of Lot 1. And most of the resolutions sitting here are addressing our process of that. We have a second process that is the key part being the speaker series towards coming up with
Affordable housing?
an ongoing approach to affordable housing and what kind of a community committee or whatever we would ultimately use to procure and run possibly and so on. So that's an issue all in itself. And then the third thing is the started out as a charrette to look at the more detailed planning of Lot 2 and looking at what the capabilities were for it for affordable housing, what other community uses might be included in that land, and how to deal with the access issues raised between the community center and the affordable housing thing. So what has happened is that Lot 2 thing got expanded out to include housing. Well, if it includes housing, it should include Lot 1 and Lot 3. And now we're including housing with the charrette. And now we're including the housing in the charrette with the Lot 1 rezoning. So this is a fairly comprehensive community engagement process, but let's not keep in mind that this is in fact 3 different processes that are overlapping considerably in the minds of the public and in the minds of council and in the minds of the committees that are involved in the various things. So anyway, I just wanted that bit of clarification as to what this is all about. Anyone else who wants to speak to the question before we call it? No? Okay. All in favor? Okay. Melanie, you with us?
Yes, I'm with you. So can I just get clarification? Sorry, can I just get clarification?
Sure.
That the 2-day public engagement event for June 9th and 10th on the community lands will involve a discussion on housing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. I'm in favor.
Good. Okay, so that's passed unanimously. Okay, and next up we have Daniel speaking about, cannabis land use bylaw.
Yay.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. So I have for your consideration the first reading of bylaw number 455 to amend the land use bylaw to include cannabis prohibition. So I'm going to just take a minute of your time to go through some of the myriad of federal and provincial legislation and sort some of that background. So currently, under federal legislation in Canada, the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act lists cannabis as a Schedule II controlled substance, so possession and sale of cannabis under that act is not legal. The federal government has proposed Cannabis Act that would allow adults to possess up to 30 grams of dried cannabis, to share up to 30 grams of legal cannabis with their adults, and to grow up to 4 cannabis plants for personal use. It also has things like a minimum age and other requirements in it. But the proposed Cannabis Cannabis Act would allow provinces and territories to license and oversee the distribution and sale of cannabis, subject to federal conditions. It also has things like provinces can put stricter regulations in place than the federal stuff, but they can't allow things that the Cannabis Act doesn't. And the Cannabis Act, the federal government has said is scheduled to be adopted as early as July 2018. So that's their target they're working towards is this summer, allowing it. On a separate, sort of under a separate regulations is medical marijuana. So that's controlled by the Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes Regulation, ACMPR. And that allows for two different streams. So it allows for personal production of medical marijuana. So that's if you have been diagnosed or need medical marijuana, you can produce it personally, or it allows commercial production of medical marijuana, and that's distributed via mail. So there's no, the ACMPR doesn't allow for retail sales of medical marijuana. You're either producing it yourself, or it's being produced in a commercial facility that's licensed, and it's then distributed by mail. Just a side note from this, so the production of medical marijuana, this was clarified by the Agricultural Land Commission recently. It's a designated farm use. So it falls under, if you're on ALR land, it's something you're allowed to farm and produce and can't be prohibited by local governments. So in terms of with the Cannabis Act underway, the BC has announced a retail framework. So they made an announcement in December, and then in February they announced a guide to provide some more information. So non-medicinal cannabis will be able to be sold and purchased through privately run retail stores or at government-operated retail stores and through online sales. So the BC Liquor Distribution Branch will operate the public retail stores. That's similar to our current BC liquor stores, but separate stores. And the Liquor Control Licensing Branch, so the LCLB, will be responsible for licensing private stores. So in February, the BC government released their BC Cannabis Private Retail Licensing Guide. So that's a guide that's aimed specifically at applicants who want to run a private retail store. So it says, for the province to issue a license, applicants must have the support of the local government in the community where the proposed store would be located. They say that would apply to private or public stores, and then they say they would have to involve some level of consultation. But with that, the BC government has put out this guide. They haven't yet introduced legislation, so there's not sort of the detail on how that would actually work, and they don't have any sort of guide then for local governments to say, when we say you need your support, this is what that would look like. It's still sort of stuff they're working out. Then in terms of what our current land use bylaw makes no mention of cannabis throughout. It wasn't something that was a considered land use issue in 2002 when the land use bylaw was adopted. So it legalized retail sale of cannabis would fall under retail use, so a use within a building or an associated lot where goods are offered or kept for sale to the public. So it'd be permitted in all commercial areas on Bowen, or all areas that we allow retail use. One thing to note is what's proposed would be similar to liquor stores in that we allow liquor stores in any retail use. Some communities, it's called winkle them out, they allow liquor stores to only in certain commercial areas. We don't do that, but that still means that liquor stores would still have to follow provincial regulations even though we permit it as a land use. So that would be similar in our current land use bylaw, retail, but you'd still have to follow the provincial steps. So Council, February 26th, gave a motion to direct staff to prepare an amendment to the land use bylaw to include no person shall use any land, building, or structure for the sale, production, and distribution of cannabis. So what staff have proposed after a legal review, a blanket prohibition at the start of that land use bylaw. So that's the section that says you can't do any of these things. So the cultivation, production, packaging, storage, distribution, dispensing, trading, or selling of cannabis is prohibited in all things except as a farm use within the ALR, as specifically permitted for medicinal purposes by Health Canada, and then or as expressly and specifically permitted as a use within a commercial, industrial, or comprehensive development zone. So that's to allow what council's indicated they're willing to do is then consider it on a site-specific basis. So blanket prohibition, but then say people can come and they can apply and they say, I think this is an appropriate space for it, and council can consider it at that time. Yeah, that's very good here. And then the other note is that this is still sort of an emerging issue in that the federal government has announced what they're going to do and they've sort of worked on their timeline. The province is still sort of figuring out the details, and so what we recommend at this point is to start this process, to give first reading, to refer it out to the Islands Trust and the APC, but to continue to monitor provincial regulations. So that's something other communities, so some communities have done the blanket prohibition. Tofino recently held a public hearing, and then after the public hearing they actually said, okay, let's wait, let's do some more consultation, let's wait to see exactly what the province is doing before we decide, okay, let's do this. Or if the province comes back and says, well, it's got really strong and it needs council resolutions and stuff, and just blanket going to be permitted, then maybe we don't need the blanket prohibition, maybe the regulations will be there in place, but that's something we don't know at this point, and so we feel it's best to start with the process, go first reading, proceed it through, and then have it in place so that we can move with what the province comes out with. So recommendation to give first reading and to refer to the Islands Trust and the ABC.
Oh, thank you. But we say that we may allow it later in commercial industrial zones.
Mhm.
So we're precluding it ever being in a residential zone or a whatever, any other zones we may have.
Yeah.
Do we want to specifically do it that way? You know what I mean?
Right, so it could just say it's permitted as a use within a zone, and we don't need to get into
Within
detail.
any zone, no?
Part of the, what's been going on in Vancouver especially, they're in areas that are highly visible, open windows, not blacked out and all that sort of stuff. Now you put it on a 10-acre lot and the house way up in the middle, and you have no idea what's going on out there.
So you like the idea that it'll only ever be
Being
commercial industrial?
Kept into a visible commercial area where you can actually see what's going on. Makes sense. I would question whether you would want it in an industrial area. I think it would just be commercial or comprehensive if you were doing comprehensive.
Don't have an industrial area.
Well, we don't have an industrial areas that we do have are swirled off away.
But they might be for production. You might have some kind of a processing center in an industrial zone, not a retail store. So I think
Yeah, I
it
think
makes
that's the
sense.
thinking behind that. That would be sort of production for whatever reason some people
If
oppose
you're
that.
looking 10 years down the road and somebody has growing it in an ALR area, you don't want to force the people doing the clipping to be sitting in a retail store window. That would be my thinking on the industrial end.
Okay.
Maureen?
This is kind of getting ahead of myself, but farm gate sales. Okay, so ALR, you grow your marijuana. Can you have farm gate sales? Could you sell marijuana at a farmer's market?
Not according to this, I think you have to be.
You have to
an
retail
outlet
outlet,
that
you have to retail outlet.
Maybe
license.
else, the liquor control people.
Yeah.
That might be something
Like,
to
I would have to
ask.
see how that would fit in with, because currently in the ALR, it's for medical marijuana. I don't think you could sell it at the, from a farm, you couldn't sell it just to anybody, right? So in terms of with the Cannabis Act underway and saying, okay, you can produce, I think still like commercial production would still be licensed and need it. So it says you can produce personal use for recreational use, but you can't sell it then to people without fall under the province catchment.
Okay, Gary, you want me to speak to this?
Yeah, I just, wow, it's a little confusing actually, what they're trying to do here, and I think they got a long way to go before they activate this. Are they planning to have a medical, like the ACMPR, is that gonna work in?
That would
That's
continue
gonna
as a
continue where it
separate
is?
stream, so that's, sort of been refined through lawsuits essentially and legislation, that essentially is a health is under your charter, right? So, and so it'll continue to be this parallel stream.
And they talk about private and public, I don't know what the difference is there, how can you have two types of retail, private and
Yeah,
public?
so that's similar to how currently they deal with liquor. So
Yeah, okay.
on Bowen we have we have a liquor store that's part of the general store. Normally they're standalone liquor stores, and then we have a beer and wine store that's a private store, and so they're both regulated through them, but they're sort of separate streams. One of the conversations I had with our lawyer is that some communities are looking at, well, is there a way to regulate and say, well, we only can have the public stores and not the private stores? And that runs into issues with zoning in terms of zoning. Generally, you can zone for use and not users kind of a thing. So you can't say, well, there can only be public government-run cannabis stores and not private retail stores. Normally something you can't do in zoning.
Okay. The other thing was there was a restriction on retail stores, and I don't know if it's set in stone from the province. I believe it was 1,000 feet. Couldn't be 1,000 feet to a beach, to a school, to this, to that, which will sort of take out all the snow cone.
That's something again that like our lawyer.
And I don't know if it's set in stone or.
Yeah. So our lawyer had said some communities are thinking about, well, do we put OCP language in that says, when considering these rezonings, we want reward distance from schools, community centers, parks, beaches. And I think she put, 300 meters. And I looked at that and thought, well, that is all of Stone Cove is close to a park, right? All of Bowen is close to parks or beaches, and so I thought that was kind of redundant, and thinking probably the scale of Bowen and the scale, like, we'd probably get, functionally, if we have 2 liquor stores, we end up with 2 cannabis stores, that's maybe, we can see scale-wise more than that, and so it makes sense if council can just consider it. Like, if you're a big community, you'd want to put some guidelines in and say, this is how we're going to manage it, because we may have 100, who knows? And here we have 2, well, we can deal with that, each one as they come up.
Anyway, I'm in favor. I mean, that's all we can do. Typically, we have to, I think we have to protect ourselves here and I agree with the bylaw. Just, they don't ban everything for the time being, and once they get things figured out, then we can bring stuff in piece by piece if we desire.
Okay. I'll go to Sloan.
Thank you for the report. It's good to see there's some new stuff since we actually brought up, or new to me, information since we initially talked about it at council. I'm happy to go ahead with it the way you've got it down for first reading, because I mean, the whole idea of all of this is safety for youth and better regulation and better for Canada. And I think I really think that public's going to need a chance to learn or read all this kind of thing and have their say too. There might be other things that are still emerging or that might be specific to Bowen. But the idea of putting this in place so that we can go to spot zoning particular places in the future is part of why I think we became a municipality, is so that we don't just react to the big forces, to the big government things, so that we can control our own land use. So I'm in support of that.
Just one quick point, it's possible that something like drugstores will be treated kind of on an en masse basis. So we might find that there is some specific type of existing retail setup already universal, like a drugstore, where you would have a very high confidence level that it would be properly managed and so on, right? So all of this could become redundant from the retailing perspective. I think when we get into sort of the commercialization, and we don't know the volumes that are being anticipated or how much of an industry it'll become, that's why it behooves us to have this sort of thing in place to be able to control all of the other aspects for, sort of odor and noise and all that sort of stuff. I'll go to Maureen and then Allison.
Just a question. I remember when we attended a workshop on this, that there was some discussion around the Islands Trust and how they were going to handle this coming through, and there wasn't any consensus. Is there any more clarity from the Islands Trust about how it didn't come up at all at your last trust meeting?
No, because it's going to be handled by the regional districts, are the ones who write those kinds of bylaws, except for...
Well, it's land use.
Except for setbacks and, well, yeah, I guess so. We'll see whether it shows up on the next agenda.
So it just hasn't been discussed?
We were early to the...
Well, it wasn't discussed, it's a local planning issue, not an Islands Trust, unless it would come up with all the other local trust areas. But they can't do business licensing, and they can't do smoking and use of streets bylaws and stuff like that. So all of that would be a regional district or a Ministry of Transportation function.
But that was Laura, who's on the executive, who we talked to at that earlier session.
But the one thing I just wanted to bring up was, I think at some point we have to talk about the other bylaws section, especially the smoking on public streets, because from a rehab perspective, it's very difficult for somebody in rehab to be walking down a public street and smelling somebody next door smoking marijuana. So it's something that needs to be addressed as well.
I wonder if Anna could add that to the second reading report, what our steps are, because it would be another bylaw.
Yeah, it's a totally separate bylaw.
Yeah, sure. I will refer that back again.
I think for the sake of this, I support this stance. I think it gives sufficient clarity for where we are now, and we can move on.
Sure. So do we have a moved and seconded yet?
I'll move it.
Okay, second. Okay. Can I call the question?
Melanie, any discussion?
No discussion, I'm in favor.
Okay, all in favor? Passed unanimously. Okey-dokey, thank you, Danielle. Hello, Emma. We haven't seen you for a while. So,
Daniel has the,
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Presenting the draft transportation plan today. This is a quick outline of the presentation. I'm just going to do a brief recap of the project and then present the key components of the transportation plan, including community vision, plan strategies, and plan implementation. Then we'll wrap this up with next steps in the planning process. So this project started with the terms of reference to provide a plan that covered the next 20 years to guide policies, development, and public investment for improving transportation on the island. We also were asked to address key objectives, including active transportation, improving bus service and regional connections, Cardina improvements, alternative options, parking management, and modal integration. The project was carried out over 5 phases to review past plans and studies, collect data, engage key stakeholders, develop alternatives for Bowen Island transportation, and prepare a transportation plan for adoption. Throughout the process, the progress was documented in a number of key deliverables. This included a public engagement plan that provided the engagement strategy for the entire project, a background report that covered the findings from the first 2 phases, a transit report for a review that was done for on-island bus service in collaboration with TransLink, a research report that compiled all the research findings for the many ideas and potential solutions that came out of the planning process. And lastly, there was a public engagement report that covered all of the engagement that was done and the outcomes. Public engagement was a really important component of this project. There were 8 distinct engagement initiatives, including surveys, a workshop, neighborhood meetups, and open houses. Over a dozen different communication tools were used, including websites, social media, and newspaper releases. By the end of the project, over 1,000 people have participated, representing a diverse cross-section of the community and key stakeholders. We received hundreds of comments, focused feedback, and specific suggestions. All of this went in to help create the community vision for Bowen Island transportation. There was a real focus on getting more in touch with nature, creativity, and innovation. The vision statement really embodies island living, simple, seamless, sustainable transportation options for every Bowen Islander. To help transform what we currently have on the island into this community vision, the plan utilizes 3 plan strategies to provide more effective and safer connections, choices for how and when you want to travel, and healthy options for both people and the environment. The first strategy of connections really focuses on strengthening the networks that we have. Over the next 20 years, the plan proposes to develop cycling and pedestrian networks to help connect neighborhoods with key destinations across the island. This strategy also calls for expanded transit service across the island, as well as improving regional connections over water and land. The second strategy focuses on increasing our choices in transportation options, especially choices other than the single occupancy private vehicle. So this strategy really focuses on facilitating active transportation, as well as things like providing infrastructure for electric vehicles and advocating for passenger ferries and other alternative modes. The last strategy is improving health, and this is both the health of the environment as well as public health. So you can see from this graphic here, overwhelming majority of greenhouse gas emissions do come from transportation, and largely from off-island transportation, including the ferry. To help reduce these emissions, we're looking at facilitating active modes as well as increasing opportunities for electrifying our fleets, e-bikes and electric vehicles. And these strategies not only reduce our emissions, but they also encourage more active lifestyles, creating a healthier community. This last strategy will really rely on incentive programs, education, promotion, and awareness. So the implementation of this plan involves 30 plan elements. Of these, some of the priority projects will be a multi-use path that crosses the island, safety improvements at Cardina, and ongoing efforts to coordinate schedules with local service providers. The estimated planned budget is $3.29 million, and there's an estimated potential funding of $1.58 million. This works out to approximately $85,000 per year for this plan. To put that into perspective, the current budget for road maintenance on this island is between $300,000 to $400,000, and this is road maintenance for vehicle use. For an incremental addition to this budget, the plan will provide a coordinated and strategic approach that will give us better connections, more choices, and healthier transportation that will help us achieve that community vision of simple, seamless, sustainable transportation. So next steps in this process will be referrals over the month of April, and that will be brought back to Council for approval in May, followed by plan implementation. And as mentioned in the report, a lot of the implementation or the funding that was mentioned earlier is really contingent upon a plan that is adopted by Council. So that is why it's important for the plan to be approved in order to implement a lot of the elements that were just discussed. And with that, staff recommends that Council refers the draft transportation plan to municipal committees and agencies for comment. Thank you.
So, discussion. Maureen?
The estimated 1.58 million in funding that you identified, what would be the sources of that external funding?
A lot of it will be from TransLink and Bike BC.
And just a suggestion, we've got a lengthier recommendation in our agenda package listing what the agencies and committees and so on are. Could I suggest that you add in Metro Vancouver?
Yes.
Thank you.
Allison?
So while we're on the recommendation, why is the Sunshine Coast Regional District there?
That's just part of the building regional partnerships. They've contributed a lot of knowledge in their planning process for transportation, and given they have a very similar context, sharing of that information just helps us advance both of our goals.
Given the financial impact of this, I would also like it referred to the Finance Committee. And on that same vein, the $85,000 a year is roughly calculated by dividing the total cost by 20?
Yes.
Yeah, when you look at the implementation plan, I think that 85 is a little bit misleading because most of the money is being spent in the first 10 years. So we're really looking at more like 150 a year for the first 10 years, not 85 if I'm looking at the...
Yes, but also the budget presents the total capital operating costs, and the 85 was also accounting for potential funding.
Yeah, but...
Yeah, so 150 in the first year, well, for example, 2018, we're looking at about a municipal cost share of about 70,000.
Can't put my hands on the actual spreadsheet.
But you're correct, it varies from year to year.
Yeah, and if you look at the capital spreadsheet, most of it's in the first 10 years.
Yeah, that'll come up.
Yeah, yeah, so anyhow, just putting it. So all throughout the thing, you talk about reducing fewer trips in private automobiles, especially single occupancy. And then you go on to say, but encouraging electric vehicles. So I just want a clarification on what do you mean by electric vehicles? Because to me, there's a Volt, there's a Leaf, there's a Tesla, those are all electric vehicles, and they're private automobiles. So why would you discourage those kind of trips?
I guess for clarification, we do want to reduce number of vehicle trips, especially single occupancy, but if they must be taken, we would like to strongly encourage them taken in electric vehicles.
And now,
If that makes sense.
if I could jump in for a second, what's the rationale? If you have electric vehicles, if we do go to this self-driving 8 people in an electric car where the car comes and picks you up and takes you somewhere, so then, is that a different type of vehicle than the vehicles we're talking about discouraging? And where do you draw the line, whether it's a 4-passenger vehicle or a 6-passenger vehicle or whatever? Do you follow what I'm getting at? You know, so we're saying, okay,
I think you're talking about autonomous vehicles.
well, yeah, but I'm also talking about whether or not they're autonomous, doesn't really matter. It's, where do you draw the line between a private vehicle, a public vehicle, how many people sit in it? My thinking is that once you make them electric, the greenhouse gas implications and all of that sort of stuff, once they've gone away, do we have the road volume problems? That, you know, if you were trying to get from Delta to Richmond, you would say, well, from a sheer congestion perspective, we want to control this. Do we really have that need on Bowen? I'll let Emma first and then I'll finish.
In terms of reducing traffic congestion?
No, yeah, what I'm saying is that if we're discouraging single or whatever you call them, normal vehicles, is it that you're thinking of gas-powered vehicles, or are electric vehicles meant to be included in that? And if electric vehicles are intentionally in it, what is the rationale for wanting to have fewer of them?
Well, I think they're still two separate things. So you're asking if the entire vehicle fleet is all electrical, is all electric vehicles, then is there really a point in reducing single occupancy vehicles? Was that the question?
Sure, you can start with that.
Okay.
Still using power.
Yeah, electricity still does generate some amount of emissions, much less. So yes, the concern would be much less single occupancy vehicles if they were all electric. We're not even close to that. So it depends how far the strategy goes. If there's a huge uptake on electric vehicles, I don't think our push for reducing single occupancy would be as strong. But right now, there's not that anticipation. I haven't seen any projected trends that would see 100% uptake.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to go to Sue
I
Ellen
didn't
first.
finish my question.
Okay, but this is, we're often an extraneous bit for a moment.
If we're only on the extraneous bit of
Yes.
electric versus
Yeah,
private use
and then
automobiles,
we'll walk
otherwise.
back to your
Okay.
Just when we're thinking about numbers of cars on the road, it's not congestion so much on Bowen as it is parking in the cove, room on the ferry, all those active transportation health initiatives, all of those things, the cost of maintaining those roads, the wear and tear, all those things I think come into it too.
Fair enough. Allison?
So we keep talking about shorter trips, and I think that's in a couple of places under strategic goals. There's shorter trips, connections, shorter trips, fewer trips. Shorter could mean shorter in distance or shorter in time. Which is it?
Both.
Okay, so when you say connections, shorter trips, that means you're not going as far as you were originally going to go, or it means that you can connect in a shorter time frame?
We're looking at both. So things like providing better infrastructure, especially looking at the active modes. Right now, if you want to walk, you have to follow the main road, but as a pedestrian, if we could offer a route that was more direct and faster, and that would be shorter in terms of distance. But also, we're also working on improving connections between, like, say, the ferry and the bus, and making the wait times shorter. That would make it shorter in time.
Okay, and then in the connections one, there's only a cross-island path. but there's the north end of the, going north to Hood Point, and once you get to the far end of Tunstall Bay, there's going either way, up to Blue Water or down to Cow Point. So I was just wondering, and I couldn't see sort of the logic of where those other paths in the long-term plan and why the Cross Island path was picked. Is it the one with the most traffic, or?
It came out of the workshop that we did. That route was really the most, by a majority. So it would go from the Bowen Bay along Adams all the way to the Cove.
Yeah, so it just is that main route, but it doesn't, so it wasn't based on scientific that serves the most people that might use it, or, because I would have thought the population density was a little higher in other areas.
Yeah, if you look at population density, it does connect the most people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, but the others aren't mentioned at all as future plans.
Sorry, you mentioned?
The other routes, I mean, it's extremely unsafe to walk from the Cove to Scarborough.
It is shown in the proposed pedestrian map in the plan. There's already an existing trail for a lot of Miller going all the way up to Scarborough. And then past Scarborough, there is proposed trail to continue.
And then all through the plan, just a general question that crops up is the use of the word accessible. So are you talking about accessible for people with disabilities or just easier to get to?
I think we're talking about universal accessibility, including people with disabilities.
Okay, because it seems to be used in both contexts, and that's, I was finding a bit confusing. All right, I've got pages of questions, but because we're just referring it out, I'll say nothing.
I'll just on one issue. Can I just ask you something? I think we'd all very much support encouraging public transport, and I'm using the positive word to encourage. What I'm not so comfortable about is discouraging certain journeys, be they one pattern. I mean, discouraging? Is this Big Brother watching you? Excuse me, people are, let's put a positive foot on this. We're encouraging people to use public transport because that is so much better and for all the reasons you've stated. But how do you intend to discourage? We're going to introduce more bylaws, put meters on people's garage doors. I mean, please, on a language point of view, could we put this positive up and not get people say, oh no, don't tell me we're getting into this routine again, because that's something I think is a fight that doesn't have to be happening. We're encouraging public transport, and out of that all the good things fall out. Please discourage. Yeah, I'm not so really comfortable with that. I think that's negative, and I think it will defray the arguments and get away from this excellent report and the things you're trying to do.
Encourage the use of
Encourage, yes, we want to encourage it. We're all on the same side. Violent agreement.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Do we have any other input from council on this? Okay, so I assume the recommendation is going to be that council refer the draft transportation plan to the transportation.
Yes, I mentioned that resolution.
Right, as opposed to the council committee of the whole. Okay, if I can have a motion to adopt the resolution?
Yeah, do you want me to read it out?
Sure.
That council refer the draft, that council refer the draft transportation plan to the Transportation Advisory Committee, the Parks, Trails and Greenways Advisory Committee, the Recreation Commission, TransLink BC Ferries, the Islands Trust, Vancouver Coastal Health, District of West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast Regional District, School District 45, ICBC, Metro Vancouver, and the Finance Committee.
And
Seconded.
Okay, any discussion before I call the question? All those in favor? Melanie, are you with us?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's unanimous. One thing, Emma, is it possible for us to get hard copies of this, of the transportation plan, just for council, for our review?
Reference.
I can print you a copy
Oh,
for sure.
sure, just, good, thanks. I just need one. I find it a lot easier to make notes on it than on them.
Well, and it's a lot easier to compare to the next version if you've got one in front of you and the other one on the
Right.
screen. In the park one.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Emma.
We have a new transportation plan.
Well,
Might not sound like a big thing to some people. Bonnie, you're up next. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm really happy to be here today to present the Parks Plan to you. I'll just read the report that was submitted. And along with the report, there's 2 attachments. There's an annotated version of the Parks Plan, and there's also an unannotated version of the Parks Plan. So the purpose today is to present the Parks Plan to Mayor and Council for adoption. A bit of background, and I know, I've appeared before you quite a few times, and some of this is sort of repetitive, but it's important to sort of encompass the 3 years worth of work that has gone into creating the plan. So updating the existing 1994 Bowen Island Parks Plan has been identified as a Bowen Island Municipality Council priority since 2015. In February of 2015, a diverse group of knowledge holders and stakeholders took part in a Parks Plan scoping visioning workshop. The information gathered during that engagement session established the foundation upon which this park plan was created. Following the foundational visioning workshop, a Parks Plan working group was established. The working group is made up of 4 members of the Parks and Trails Advisory Committee. Daniel Martin also took part in the working group. And I'm happy to see Christine Miller here today. She is a member of the Parks Plan and really, put a lot of effort in reading the various reams of paper that make up the plan over the last few years. So that's great. And Councillor Sue Ellen Fast is also a member of the working group. Lees and Associates consultants were retained in February 2016 to assist in updating the plan. And from the beginning, the plan was a collaborative, it was built on collaboration and consultation. And Lees did assist in updating the plan and creating the plan, but it really was a collaborative process and really trying to make it Bowen specific. I really truly believe we don't really understand our island until we live here. So anyway, the development of the plan, the final draft Parks Plan is, as I said, a combination of 3 years worth of consultation and development. And a shared vision for Bowen Island's parks, trails, and beaches emerged from the engagement and consultation with the community, stakeholders, and council. And some of the participation options that have taken place over the last 3 years include a statistically valid phone survey, there's 100 participants, an open access online survey, focus group sessions with youth and seniors and people with mobility issues, pop-up booths at 2 farmers markets, 2 open houses, interactive display at BowFest in 2016, workshops and with stakeholders, and an online questionnaire to review the key recommendations of this plan, the 7 goals primarily and the recommendations. In response to the community, stakeholder, and BIM Council generated priorities, relevant goals, objectives, and recommendations were developed. The plan, not 9 goals, there's 7 goals, and there's 21 objectives and 73 recommendations. I mean, some of the versions of the plan, it was upwards of 93, 95 recommendations, so really whittled it down and sort of condensed the recommendations, and I feel that all the recommendations are representative of the issues that will face our parks over the next 10 years. So the development process, just a few of the details, some of these are a little bit repetitive, but just want to go through the exhaustive list or comprehensive list of items, sort of milestones. Key, so stakeholders in the Parks, Trails, Greenways Advisory Community Visionary Workshop, February 2015, as I noted. The Parks Plan Working Group established November of 2015. Lees and Associates Consultants retained February 2016. Information gathering from February to March of 2016. Research and analysis of visionary workshop outcomes and existing municipal GIS data from March, April of 2016. First Nations consultation, March 2016 through to June 2017. Creation of an updated and consolidated Parks, Trails, Beach access map. That was quite a task. That was April, May 2016. Community engagement and consultation of feedback, inventories, and information. That was a long period of time from 2016 to 2017. Analysis, review, and editing of the Parks Plan. That was from June 2017 to October 2017. The Parks, Trails, Greenways Advisory Committee endorsed the draft Parks Plan in October of 2017. And myself, I attended the Recreation and Community Commission meeting, the Recreation Community Commission meeting in November to present some of the maps and to get some feedback at that time. I also spent quite a few hours incorporating all of Mayor and Council's feedback from the plan, from the committee of the whole. That was, I feel that I really did get a lot of great feedback from Mayor and Council and had fun incorporating that feedback. So a little bit of the Parks Plan content, just a really high overview. The plan provides guidance and assistance for parks, trails, and beach-related development and decision-making over the next 10 years. It really is truly a guide. Although the primary focus of the Parks Plan is municipal parks, recommendations about trails and beaches have been included. It's hard to separate them out, and they're such a part of our natural space identity on Bowen. The Parks Plan includes a new park classification system and recommendations to improve the park system and park amenities. The plan identifies opportunities, challenges, and recommendations for improving trails and beaches on Bowen, protecting the island's natural capital, and collaborating with stewards and partners. As part of the Parks Plan development, Cultural Advisor Cheryl Rivers of the Squamish Nation was consulted. Opportunities for incorporating First Nations culture into BIM's parks are included in the plan. The implementation plan identifies high priority recommendations and provides planning, capital, and operational cost estimates. The Parks Plan provides guidance to municipal staff, the Parks, Trails, and Greenways Advisory Committee, and Bowen Island Council over the next 10 years. The plan does not provide specific park site plans or specific budget recommendations. It really will be like a project-to-project basis. All recommendations outlined in the park plan will be vetted by staff and council in future planning processes with resources and budget considerations at that time. Incorporation of the Committee of the Whole feedback, that happened on October 23rd, 2017. And just some notable incorporations of feedback, just really high level. There were lots of little tweaks and typos and small edits and small language changes, but I just sort of tried to highlight some major, not major, but contextual changes from the version that was presented to the Committee of the Whole in October to this final version that's before you today. So some notable revisions included refinement of the implementation framework and budget estimates. I really sifted through that budget, and I really feel like I condensed it down into a real doable, it might sound like quite a bit to implement everything in the plan over the next 10 years of, over $900,000, but at one point the budget was a lot more than that. So I really, through my experience now, like being able to do this job for a few years back to back now, that I have a fairly good sense of what things cost and how we can make it work with our limited budget resources and staffing resources. So I really spent a lot of time going through each recommendation and really thought about it and justified it with my experiences and some research as well. So I think, getting it down under $1 million was a feat, and I really think that it really is represented, our recommendations are doable with, all the implementation of the plan is doable with that estimate that has been sort of percolated and sifted, and that's what is now existing in the draft plan. So inclusion of potential high-level funding sources, really high-level funding sources, because unlike with maybe transportation and translate, hopefully being a reliable source of funding over the next 10 to 20 years, sort of funding that's come across my desk anyway over the last few years is sort of varied. So I do know one thing, that we do have a community parks reserve, and we do also have some money, a GL code for improving access to the sea. So we have those funds. That's one sector of the reserve or the funds. But we also have grants that do come across my desk, like the Environmental Damages Fund, and there's active the Vancouver Coastal Health, the fund or the grant that Shauna applied for the bike park. So there's always sort of these grants, but to name them specifically is a little bit difficult. I've got a list in the plan of potential grants sources, and with the adoption of the plan, moving forward and having some our good staff resources now in the Parks Department, that we can actively be more proactive in obtaining grants and looking for grants. I really feel that we have a bit of staffing capacity to do that. Also, I feel that through working with the maps extensively over the last 3 years, that through annotation on the maps themselves, improvements to the clarity of the map legends, and also through color coding, we were able to, I think, alleviate, for the most part, the concerns that I heard about potential trespass. Because a lot of our parkland currently is very difficult to get to without possibly trespassing, we've dealt with those pieces of parkland by shading them out, like they're gray. So, we've really tried to work with, the concerns. I've met with the president or the chair of the Hood Point Association. I've met with Camp Beauisle representatives. And really, where there's been concerns, I've addressed those, and things have been taken off the map. So the maps that you see before you, I don't believe there's any, as far as I'm concerned, any concerns with the people that I've spoken to. The people that I've spoken to over the last 3 years, I've really felt that those concerns have been addressed through the maps that are now included with the draft plan, or with the parks plan, the final draft. Also, we refined the new park classification system, and that's a really great thing, because right now it's A, B, C, and now we've got a more descriptive classification system that really does describe what sort of parks we have on Bowen Island. Another major shift between the plan that was presented to the committee of the whole and the plan that's before you today was that the recommendations were tightened up to be relevant to municipal parks, because it is a parks plan. So I believe that the recommendations before you are specific to and relevant to parks, trails, and beaches. Whereas I think some of the language before was a bit painted with a broad brush and sort of encompassed maybe more than just parks, just through the language. And also we've looked at a little bit of strengthening in the area of the acquisition criteria. I've really sort of hashed out numbers and some proposed trail linkages. There is cost estimates associated with that, and I believe that they are representative of what that would cost, and that's through survey costs, costs associated with legal vetting of legal easements, etc., and figuring out how many legal easements you have to have on a trail linkage, counting the number of private properties, etc., etc., etc. So I really did delve in and figure those numbers out to the estimates that are, I think, good, better than guesstimates, I think your estimates. So the next steps for the plan. I just wanted to sorry to just break this, is I just wanted to really thank the park staff and also the bylaw staff, just with their support and, as I say, the Parks, Trails and Greenways Advisory Committee as well. I just wanted to thank, I wanted to do that at the front, but staff has been amazing. Carlos Goose did a lot of work, and Hillary's just stepped in and done a lot of work here too. So I just want to say, and Tess as well with mapping. So just want to thank staff for being so dedicated and amazing. So the next steps, I just wanted to just sort of go back to that the Island Plan 218 includes the park plan adoption and implementation planning under strategic pillar A, well protected ecosystems and green spaces. So it is in our Island Plan for 218. But following adoption, final layout will begin, and some, just sort of prettying up or desktoping and making the document just a nice appealing document with content. And I'm proposing that a small number of copies be printed initially. And like the recreation master plan, I liked how the appendices were in a pocket, so they're not attached to every copy because it makes it cleaner, but have some versions where you can have kind of a folder and have the appendices there for reference. And the Parks, Trails, Greenways Advisory Committee will develop and present an implementation plan to Council. Where applicable, the manager of Parks and Environment will work with other committees, bring forth relevant recommendations for information and discussion and implementation planning. The communication strategy, the adopted Parks Plan will be circulated to municipal committees and distributed through VIM's Communication Dissemination Network. The financial implications, budget allowances included in the Parks Plan have been categorized as planning, minor capital, major capital, and operational. These allowances are high-level estimates for planning purposes. All recommendations included in the plan are subject to council approval prior to implementation. As part of the approval process, more precise costs and required resources will be determined prior to actual implementation. Proposed budget estimates in the Parks Plan are in addition to the existing operational budget or assigned capital expenditures. High priority recommendations have been determined based on the community engagement and consultation process. High priority recommendations that have budgeting implications have been assigned short timelines, and short timeline in this context is 218 to 220. Of the 73 recommendations included in the Parks Plan, 13 have been identified as priority or short timeline items, and 7 of those have been assigned with implementation estimates. The 7 high priority items have an estimate implementation cost of $162,000 and approximately $163,000. And the total estimate implementation cost for the Parks Plan over the next 10 years is $984,500. I think it's important to note that I think it's important to note that $100,000 of that is actually slated for replacement of the artificial turf field, which is required within the next 2 to 3 years. Between 218 and 220, we're going to need a replacement field. So we've already started to look at some different options, and I'm working closely with the Recreation Department with that, with just coming up with a plan there. So $100,000 of that is allotted to that artificial field. And another notable expenditure or estimate is for $125,000 out of this $984,000 is allotted to a multi-port sort of sports court that was highlighted with the Rec Commission as well, and possibly could be implemented or incorporated into the Lot 2 lands with the community center perhaps. But it's a long-term item, and it's just of note. So there's $225,000 that of the 984 that are really recreational focused, but they weren't captured within the rec plan, and they are important items, so they're included in this plan. Funding for the implementation of the recommendations included in the park plan will be determined on a project-specific basis. Some projects will be subject to grant funding. Other projects may be funded from reserves, such as the Community Parks Reserve Fund, or improving access to the C Fund. Costs and potential funding associated with the recommended initiatives will be considered each year during the budgeting process. So in summary, the final draft Parks Plan is being presented to Council today for adoption. The plan is the culmination of 3 years of consultation and development. The plan is comprised of 7 goals, 21 objectives, and 73 recommendations, and will provide guidance for park, trail, and beach-related development and decision-making over the next 10 years. The total estimated implementation cost for the Parks Plan is $984,500. This amount is in addition to existing budget allotments. So the recommendation before you today is that Council adopt the Parks Plan as attached to the March 18th, 2018 report prepared by the Manager of Parks and Environment.
Okey-dokey. Thank you. If I could get that motion on the table and seconded?
No,
Okay.
no, I have a bunch of comments and I would like to make some amendments to the plan.
Well, I'll second
Okay.
the motion.
Okay, so now discussion before I call the question. Please.
Bonnie, you've done a great job and a lot of hard work, so please do not take comments personally. But you know, I'll start with what I think will be the most difficult part first. I've expressed concern all along about this being a parks plan, not a parks and environmentally sensitive areas or conservation plan. So to that extent, there's a few sections that I think, pieces that I think need to be removed. But I'd also like to go back to the recommendation, I think it's page 68 of the plan, where the recommendation was amended. It is important to work with, I'm in table 17, Province of British Columbia. Very last paragraph, it is important to work with the province to ensure that industrial scale logging does not occur on Crown lands, impacting Vaughan's finite water resources. It's slightly different from the original one, which I think was just to ensure that logging does not occur on Crown lands. So what are we wanting the province to do? Are we wanting no logging? Are we only wanting no industrial scale logging? Or are we only wanting logging that won't affect the watershed? If I were the province, I'd read that to say they're happy with small woodlots, they're happy with some logging, and under our forest practices code, industrial logging doesn't affect the watersheds anyhow, so logging will continue. So I don't think that wording is what we want.
Can you tell me what page you're on?
I'm on page 68 of the plan.
68 of the plan itself.
Thank you.
Which is page 69 of 108, I think, keeps popping up in there. So, I have a bunch of typos which I assume we can correct, Bonnie and I together, like
Right.
protected doesn't have a O in it or T in it or something, but a bunch of those wrong name for the household, Hood Point Household Society.
Let's work on this one point. This was Councillor Nicholson's suggested change, so I'll let her speak to that.
RLCP does permit logging as it stands. And in the discussion last summer, we were speaking about opposition to industrial scale logging. So I guess I was thinking in terms of what the province would think when they look at RLCP, and then if this were to say that we simply oppose the logging, that there's an inconsistency there.
Totally agreed, but as Defend Our Island Forest Group, I think they want no logging. So, I mean, I don't know. If I were the province and reading this, I'd say, fine, we can log, because forest practices code, they have to protect the watershed while they're
Well,
logging.
it is important to work with the province to ensure that industrial scale logging does not occur on Crown lands.
Impacting Vaughan's finite water resources.
I propose that we take out the words impacting Bowen's finite water and the bit about the climate capture. If we just take that little bit out, then it just ends at Crown Lands, period. Would that address?
Well,
your
I'm raising the question is, I don't think this statement, if the presentation we had 2 meetings ago from the Defender Islands Forest, I don't think they, and what do we mean by, what's the definition of industrial scale logging? Which is in the OCP, and as I pointed out, if we don't want any logging on Bowen, on the Crown Lands, then we're gonna have to amend the OCP. But, you know, what is it, and, you know.
I think it's important to say industrial scale logging because the minute you say no logging period, then you've started a fight. Because they say, well, of course we have to worry about windfall, we have to worry about dangerous trees, we have to worry about fire protection, we have to worry about proper access, you know, da-da-da. So your request, Bowen Island, that there be no logging on Crown Lands is just a non-starter. And I have had this conversation, so I can tell you this, that is their position. And so it is important to define that we considered industrial scale logging is what we are opposed to, not all of those other minor types of logging that
But
would be
is
required.
woodlot industrial scale logging? I don't think a woodlot is industrial scale logging.
A woodlot is a subsection of a forest, right? I mean,
yeah,
but so it's part of a bigger project. You don't have woodlots standing.
Yes, you do.
Not private woodlots, public woodlots. It
Public-
depends if it's
Yeah.
on Crown land or not.
Within the Crown land, it's still going to be considered industrial scale.
Well, I don't
whether you
know.
call
Do
it
we know what the
woodlot.
definition of
Well, I know, but you
industrial
can
scale
throw
logging
those
is?
sorts of things out, okay.
Okay,
To
well,
try, do you
all
know
I'm
the
saying is
definition of
that-
that word?
I mean, if you want to leave it there like that, that's fine. I'm not objecting
I believe
to
it's
that. I'm
consistent.
just throwing out that I don't think this is consistent with what we told the Defender Islands Forest people when they came and what they are looking for.
I believe that this properly reflects what we have discussed and agreed upon in the past.
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
I'm just saying, I don't think Defender Islands Forest and a large portion of the public is going to be okay with that.
Okay, just to stay on your point for a minute, Suzanne, it's the question before us is, should we drop the words impacting Bowen's finite water resources
Or
and
even the word
carbon
industrial.
sequestration abilities? Let's deal with this other point first. So if we did accept that we're saying industrial scale logging, would we want to leave off the end of that sentence?
I'm proposing that as a way to say clearly that we don't want industrial scale logging on Crown land. And if it simplifies that and makes it clear, then I propose we take out those few words. But I do think that they say something to the public, and I'm easy either way. It was an option. I'm concerned that we pass the parks plan. We've got logging later on the agenda in 11.8.
This is again back to Maureen because this was her suggestion originally.
I'm just looking at the Defend Island Forest website, and they have a bulleted point list in which they say they're asking people to consider how industrial logging and deforestation on Bowen Island would affect property values. So they do on their own website talk about industrial logging.
Right. So
I'm just bringing it up
Okay.
as a potential issue with the public, not a potential issue with me.
Okay, I think we have a general agreement on the table that the term industrial scale logging is an important part of our position on this, and we should leave that in. And so that brings us back to only the point of, do we leave that as a freestanding statement, it's in our parks plan, it's in our OCP done, or do we put in the qualifiers of the potential impacts we think it would have? I'm quite happy to pull out the end of that sentence and just have this as a bang, we're opposed to it, period, and be done with it.
That would be my vote, because qualifiers are dangerous. What do you leave in, what do you take out? For simplicity, if it matches the other wording, let's go ahead with that. I think it's cleaner.
So we're gonna put a period after Crown lands and take out impacting Bowen's finite water resources and carbon sequestration abilities.
Yes, let's
Yes,
follow
I
that.
would move that amendment to the plan, that specific removal of the words impacting Bowen's finite water resources and carbon sequestration abilities.
Is it, Bonnie, what are your thoughts on this?
That's great.
Okay.
Whatever council wishes, that's good.
So that needs to be, just for clarification, at the last paragraph in table 17 under the province of British Columbia section.
Right.
So,
If the last sentence still stands in that paragraph, I mean, I'll make it a separate paragraph, special places on Bowen Island identified, that's still.
yeah. And it probably should be a separate paragraph.
Yeah, it should be, yeah.
Yeah, sure. You can leave it at that. We could find two for. So, let's call the question on that and get that one off the table.
I moved it?
Yes. Second, all in favor, passed unanimously. Maureen, or Melanie, I'm sorry, Melanie, you're happy with that?
All in favor, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's passed unanimously. So back to Allison.
Okay, so my other concern all along has been that this is a parks plan, and I did look up the definition of parks in the dictionary. So no disrespect meant to the Islands Trust Fund or to the Bowen Island Conservancy. I'm in table 18 now. Or to the Bowen Island Eco Alliance, the Fish and Wildlife Club, or the Heritage Preservation Association, or the Coastal Douglas Fir Association, or Camp Boyle. But I think all those sections should be struck from table 17 because they are to do with conservation and environmentally sensitive areas. The Islands Trust Fund is entirely for conservation. They wouldn't use they don't use money to raise money for parkland. And but they are a very valuable organization for conservation purposes for environmentally sensitive areas. Same with the Bowen Island Conservancy. If you're going to include the Eco Alliance, then I think you have to include the Bowen Island Improvement Association. The Fish and Wildlife Club is entirely operating in Crippen Park. And the Heritage Preservation Association, they would hold public events in the Davies Orchard land in Crippen. And if you're going to include the Heritage Preservation Association, then you have to include the Bowen Island Museum and Archives, as they could easily also host public events on public land. And then Coastal Douglas Fir and Camp Boyle, again, they're all to do with private lands, not running programs on parkland. So,
okay,
I would move that those all be removed
Okay.
out of table 18.
So first of all, I'll go to Bonnie, it's her report.
I can't go through all of the groups that you mentioned, but I will mention one that stood out for me as the Fish and Wildlife Club. We collaborate with them quite a bit, like at Tunstall because Explosives Creek. And I could probably, all those groups, I have talked to them at different capacities, but just out of that group, I can't go, it's quite an exhaustive list, but definitely Fish and Wildlife Club, we have collaborated with.
I'll go to Maureen.
I see no harm in having this list here. I support retaining it.
I agree. Anyone else wish to speak to it? My take on it is that this could be, it's pretty mom and apple pie-ish to me. Opportunities for stakeholder partnerships, identifying various groups, what their mandate is, and ways that it was felt they might help us in some kind of a partnership way. I don't know if we need to get political about it. Sorry, Sue Ellen?
I agree with Maureen that I don't see any harm in this being here. It's an invitation for all these clubs to help with parks, greenways and trails and beaches, trails and beaches. And I think many of them have helped or have potential to help, especially in helping us get funded.
What if we add in other groups identified by council in the future?
Sure.
We could put a note that it's not an exhaustive list.
Very good.
Yeah. So just process-wise, you move that as a motion?
I was throwing it out, but I wanted to discuss it. I can move it as a motion, and if somebody
So I
wants to
just
second
wanted
it.
clarity, that's what you were doing.
I don't know. you want to make it a motion, or do you want to leave it with adding the other groups to the instruction of Bonnie?
I'll make it as a motion.
Okay, and so your motion is?
That we delete table 18, Bowen Island Eco Alliance, Bowen Island Fish and Wildlife Club, Bowen Island Heritage Preservation Association, Coastal Douglas Fir Associated Ecosystems Conservation Partnership, Camp Bow Isle, and then going back up to the top, the Islands Trust Fund.
Okay, do we have a seconder? No, okay, so the motion is not seconded.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Now, we're back to recommendation 7.2.2.
Page?
Well, that's what I'm trying to, what page is 7.2.2 on?
73.
So council is amenable to the idea of adding other stakeholder groups?
Yeah.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Under 7.2.2, and it refers somewhere else in the report, but this is a specific recommendation. Work with Metro Vancouver to develop a joint use agreement for Crippen Regional Park to formalize community use of the baseball field. My understanding is that the Baseball Association already has a formal agreement with Crippen Park for the use of the baseball field. So I think if you're, and they look after some of the scheduling and so forth. So I would like the words, work with,
Continue to?
can work with the Bowen Island Men's Slow Pitch League, I think. Is that the right name? Shauna, do you know what?
I think so.
Work with the Bowen Island Men's Slow Pitch League and Metro Vancouver.
I think it's fast pitch.
There's also a mixed league
Fast
as
pitch.
well. There's also a mixed league as well.
Well, I don't know if they've been playing anymore, but there is an agreement with the men's slow pitch has the agreement, but they're the ones that maintain the fence, maintain the field, mow it and all that stuff. So they need to be worked with there. So.
Could we say local groups?
Well, no, they're the ones that have the existing agreement, the men's slow pitch league. And those other local groups scheduled through them, yeah.
But I'm just wondering, that may change in the future, so maybe it's
Well, this
something
is a
along the
for
lines
now.
of stakeholders, baseball stakeholders.
How about work with existing stakeholders in Metro Vancouver?
If I may ask, there is no joint use agreement for the baseball
We
field?
don't have a
No,
formal.
it's
Oh,
with
we
the-
are not part of it, it's
It's the
directly
men's slow
between
pitch,
those two.
yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's just
So-
formalizing that at a government level.
So work with Metro Vancouver and other stakeholders
Well, the existing, there's an existing
and
agreement.
existing agreement holders.
Yeah,
Does that work? Existing agreement holders?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Existing
Yeah.
future. This is a
Yeah.
long-term plan.
The once in future.
yeah, but once you've done a new joint use agreement, then it's probably going to be with.
Yeah, once we're in it, then.
I just don't want you going off and talking to Metro without involving the slow pitch league and recognizing that they've already got an agreement.
Sorry, can you just repeat the wording just for, so I have.
Work with existing agreement holders in Metro Vancouver.
Yes. And in the future will take care of itself. Okay, that is moved, you've captured that wording, Tyler?
I have.
Okay, is there a seconder to that motion? Yes, and all in favor? Okay, and so that is passed.
Okay.
Melanie?
Melanie?
You with us, Melanie?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay,
Okay.
table 6.
Page.
I don't have page numbers on here.
What's it about?
We can slide back.
Well, if you
to-
go back to table 6, it's recommendation 1.5.2.
Page 36.
Thank you. This is the trouble with these machines and not having hard copy, it's harder to flip back. This is a recommendation that I have no problem with, but I think it's in the wrong place.
Which recommendation?
1.5.2, active recreation in park activate recreation and parks by collaborating on recreation plans and ensuring safe and reliable programming. The objective is support community events and cultural activities through the provision of adequate gathering spaces and programming. If you go back to objective 1.2,
Sorry, Allison, give me that number, the one you just did again.
objective recommendation 1.5.2.
On page 38.
Okay.
1.5.2.
Which is under the, it's a recommendation, it's under the objective label of support community events and cultural activities through provision of adequate programming. If you go back to objective 1.2, which is, a couple of pages back, it says promote active lifestyles, health and wellness through a diversity of outdoor recreation opportunities. I think that's where that one belongs.
Yeah.
So I'm not changing the recommendation, I'm just saying it's in the wrong place. So the motion would be to move recommendation 1.5.2 to be under objective 1.2 rather than 1.5 and renumbered accordingly.
Sure. Okay, 'tis done.
So move, seconded, and taken by consent. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, the rest of it I think are typos. I'll just check my- No. This thing ran out of battery juice. All my notes were on a hard copy. So I had to read it on my laptop, which wouldn't let me make notes.
It's okay.
And so I made
I like your
handwritten
recycling,
notes.
that's good.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this was the
Okay.
only paper that was handy.
It's great.
Oh, 4.1.5, so recommendation 4.1.5. Scrolling.
So it is page 62.
The Islands Trust Program, you can jump to a page. Recommendation 4.1.5 says, work with developers to ensure contribution of park and trail amenities that are beneficial to the community. So if this is a subdivision approving officer, they have to follow, the guidelines for the parks plan. So I think it needs the words, work with developers to ensure that contribution of park and trail amenities follow the plan and are beneficial to the community. Because otherwise you're setting up a whole separate discussion that they're not going to follow the plan. We're just looking for something that's going to benefit the community. It might be something totally different.
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Park and trail amenities. So this is 4.1.5, ensure contribution of park and trail amenities follow the park plan and are beneficial to the community.
Okay, Tyler, that work great?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're right underneath in the next one.
But we'll move in
Okay.
second.
Yeah.
And all in favor? Okay, that one's,
4.1.6, ensure standards for trail statutory right-of-ways and easements are incorporated in the development approval process. Shouldn't that be in the infrastructure standards bylaw?
hey, Daniel.
Sorry, which number was that?
Are they in the infrastructure standards bylaw?
Trail statutory right-of-ways and easements are incorporated in the development approval process.
What infrastructure bylaw?
The one that we've.
The
the World
subdivision
Standards
services,
Services
yeah,
bylaw?
yeah, that's the appropriate place for
I
it,
mean,
I think it is.
so the subdivision servicing bylaw would speak to what they have to be and what the standards are.
Okay, so what we should, so we incorporate it in the subdivision servicing bylaw.
Yeah, and so that would, that's maybe speaking to, and then we'd say, well, we adopt the subdivision, okay, we've met that recommendation, we've incorporated them.
Yeah, but it's in here as a recommendation that it be in the development approval process, but they need to be out there in writing for somebody so they know.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
I just wanted to mention that one of the key recommendations that came out of the consultation was a trails plan, like kind of a trail master plan. So I sort of envision, I mean, we'll have a scoping exercise of that and, you know, involve council in that process. But with that, I thought maybe there might be some standards also included in that trail plan. I mean, but also, and I know that we have ensured that the revisions of the new bylaw, the subdivision servicing did have some standards incorporated. Yeah,
Sometimes
so-
there are different levels of standards and different
Exactly.
levels
But-
of plan.
But the
A high
development
level of-
approval process is more of a document on how you go through doing your development, of getting your development approval.
Could we just say in municipal plans and processes?
Not incorporated through policy?
Well, it's going to be covered by the services agreement plan anyway, right?
Well, how about incorporated in the subdivision servicing bylaw and other policy?
Yeah,
Mm.
sure.
Sure.
I'll go with that.
Yeah. Let's not have one tripping over the other.
Yeah.
You got that one, Tyler?
Incorporated in the subdivision and servicing bylaw and other policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, moved, seconded, all in favor? Okay, that one is a done deal as well.
Okay. Page 63, page 10. I don't understand what I meant by that one. Maybe it's a typo. There's some typos where we talked about waterfront park and oceanfront access and stuff like that. There's a lot of reading to do this weekend. It's not as organized as I wanted it to be. Okay.
There was a lot of.
Now, my only other total process question, and I'm having trouble with what's the Recs Commission's responsibility and what's the Parks and Trails Committee responsibility? And I went and looked at West Van's website and it's a Parks and Recreation Committee or Commission. And then we've split them into two. We used to have one sort of combined. But there's a lot of active parkland and stuff being identified in here, so I guess, did the Rec Commission actually meet and go through the whole plan? Looking at it with perspective to the needs of things that are identified in the recreation master plan, that the land they've asked for is all in here, and land that they don't want isn't in here?
Sean and I have identified areas of overlap. There aren't a lot of areas of overlap. The activation of the parks has kind of been of late, and Sean could speak to it too, but it's sort of been an initiative that's been established or started within the last maybe 6-8 months. So really, Sean and I have been working very closely together. We work, our workload, our work sort of really intermeshes and overlaps. And so really, there isn't a lot of overlap in the, there's no conflict or overlap. The one thing that was identified was a multi-use sports court. It was identified in both consultation processes. But other than that, the rec plan was a little bit of a different, it didn't maybe go into identifying spaces for active recreation. Whereas, and as I say, so what was not captured in the recreation plan has been captured here, so that it's captured in some plan. So, yeah, that's sort of what I...
And I think the specifics of what are in the park plan lend themselves to some of the overarching recommendations that were in the rec plan, such as providing more outdoor recreation opportunities. So Bonnie and I have been working closely in regards to projects like the bike park and the disc golf that may be coming forward proposed. And the Recreation Commission has been a part of that, getting information around that and supporting those initiatives that are specific to the parks plan, but will also provide recreation ongoing.
So the Rec Commission is comfortable with the plan. And I guess just from a budgeting perspective too, like who pays for what and it's, yeah.
In terms of the activating the parks, if that was specific, I think, to one of your comments as well, the recreation mandate is to be cost recovery. So the recreation programmers have been planning for some spring events, community events that will be in the municipal parks. and those will be cost recovery as all of our programs are.
No, it was more the, who's paying for the capital costs and what budget and so forth, so, okay.
Okay. Did you want to speak to that, Maureen?
No, I've got something else.
Okay. Okay, you're
Done?
Probably not, but I can't find anything.
okay. Moving on to Maureen.
Just a question concerning Table 3, which is the park classification. It's on page 26. I really like the way that the new classifications are working, but I just wanted to confirm that you have not, at this point, slotted all of the parks into particular categories. Is that correct?
Most have been categorized.
26.
Yeah, most have been categorized. I mean, there is sort of a ambiguousness to lot 2. In that it's...
In particular, I was wondering about Cape Roger Curtis. None of those 3 municipal parks seem to be slotted.
Yeah, so that was Councillor Morse, and I talked a lot about that, and I deliberated on that point quite extensively. And so they are technically road ends.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can argue that Tunstall is also a road end.
Mm-hmm.
We can also say Sandy is a road allowance. It's not necessarily road end, but it's road allowance. So what we did, because we've seen that the cable infrastructure project for Shaw has gone on recently, and it has been included on the road end. Like there's no covenant, like a covenant, a protected covenant in the road end can't exist, sort of, or don't really exist at the same. So there's no covenant area at that road end. So it purely is a road end. It is utilized as public space, but we deliberated back and forth, and to identify it as a road end, because there is infrastructure and there may be, who knows down the road, maybe there won't be, but there is a cable going through there now, that it's still public land, road allowance, albeit, that provides access to the sea. So the trail system around it, I mean, is heavily used, yes, but technically it is road end. So hence it was classified as a bit of a different ball of wax.
That doesn't make sense to me. They're listed as park in the map, and if other road ends are being classified as park.
I thought they weren't listed as park in the map.
They are.
Which page is the map on?
So they've been specifically excluded from calling it park?
The map description is parkland and road end brackets with public access to the coast. And a big please respect private property. So they're not listed as park, they're listed as Roger Curtis Lane.
BIM road ends with access to the coast.
Yeah, so they're listed as road end.
Okay. And so what are your thoughts, Maureen?
My thoughts are that those are municipal parks down there, as far as I was aware, and there's no distinction, even if the classification here says parkland and road ends. If Tunstall is technically a road end and is being considered a park, I don't see why they're not considered a park. So, I mean, I'm not going to vote against a parks plan because of this particular point, because I'm assuming that the examples in the classification system are simply that, examples, and not intended to be inclusive of all of the parks and road ends in the system. So if that could be made clear at table 3, that these are examples of parks that fit into that classification system, then I'd be comfortable with it. But as far as I can determine what's presented here, those are parks.
Right.
I second that, because I can see other beaches, familiar beaches, Miller's Landing, that are also
road ends.
Technically road ends, but they're treated as parks and beaches. And this is partly, this parks plan is not just about acquisition and labeling, it's also about managing and operations, which
Yeah.
the previous park plan wasn't, but this one is. And I think it's important to look at things from a user's point of view. And if you're looking for a park, you want to go, or a beach, you go to the park or the beach.
Okay, point well made. I'm going to go to Allison for just a moment. if I may.
Well, then I think what we need to do is just call Sandy Beach, and call Tunstall Bay, Tunstall Bay. And they're shown on the map or Tunstall Bay Beach and Sandy Beach, and Miller's Beach isn't even in the list. So, or numbered.
If I
Miller's Landing is on the map I'm looking at, but I propose and second the simple change, which is just a little footnote that Maureen is proposing, because I don't want to change, big changes to a map like this will add months. And I think that this is an issue that won't make any sense necessarily to the people of Bowen Island. This is a parks plan that's been in the works for 3 years. It's long overdue. This is what the current parks plan looks like, you know.
Yeah, okay.
And I think we should adopt this plan.
No, if I can jump in for a moment, I kind of think that we should pass something that says where road ends are used for recreational purposes, for purposes of our parks plan, they should be considered parks.
I'd like that clarification, because in the subdivision agreement for Cape Project Curtis, they're clearly identified as road ends. So that would, I think, cover that off.
I second Mayor Steele's proposal.
I think I do. If Murray could just bear with me for 1 second, would you mind going through that? I think I'm comfortable with it, but I just want to make sure that as far as the Cape is concerned, it's not eroding or giving them or classifying them any less than they are now.
No. The idea being that wherever we've got a road end to the ocean, like down at the end of Miller's Landing or something like that, and nobody even knows about it or thinks about it, they just think it's a park, right? It's public land, it's used as a park, we maintain it as a park, we have guys coming and working on it as a park, but we consider it that type of thing. If people want to do something down there, we think of them doing things on the park, not doing things on a road end, right? And so for the purposes of the parks plan, right, which includes operations and all that sort of stuff, I think that where road ends are used for recreational purposes, for the purposes of this plan, they be considered parks. Bonnie?
Yeah, thank you. And this has been a lot of thought has gone into this road ends and how they're classified. And so do you think, Council, that putting a caveat or an added sort of annotation with the parks map, like with the map saying that road ends, public lands occurring at road ends, or identifying those areas, like we said, Miller, Sandy, Tunstall, Cape Project Curtis, that these areas are considered, are utilized as parkland. Something to that effect?
I think your motion was wherever a road end is used for recreation, we manage it as a park.
That's acceptable.
Yes.
But it doesn't say they're parks, it says how they're going to be managed.
Can be a note at the end of the table.
Mm-hmm.
But what that also means is adding in the CRC road end / parks into the table too. I think.
Oh, they're already there.
They're there.
And labeled.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
So wherever a road end is used for recreation, we manage it as a park.
Yeah, and you can make the wording nicer.
Public recreation.
Well, why don't you say for beach access?
Let's pass, it's noon.
I think public recreation is a more inclusive term. I don't want somebody to say, oh, well, we're not going to include that because you can't actually get to the beach from there. People just use it to sit out on the point and have picnics, right? I mean, so it's not necessarily beach access, it's public recreation.
So I moved that, or if you moved it, I seconded it.
Sure.
Tyler, what have you got written down, please?
Wherever road ends are used for public recreation, they're managed as a municipal park.
All right, and again, the wording could be
Plan.
better better wording.
In the recreation plan, they are,
Yeah.
For purposes of the recreation plan?
Yes,
At the
so
beginning?
for purposes of the.
Of the parks plan.
Parks plan. Parks plan?
I have that.
Okay.
So that was Mayor Skills and Sue Ellen Pratt seconded.
So can you read it for me one more time?
Sure. Wherever road ends are used for public recreation for the purposes of the parks plan, they are managed as a municipal park.
Rather than wherever, why not just where? Where road ends are used for recreational purposes.
For better grammar.
For public recreation.
Okay. All in favor? Done deal. It's not the labor battle anymore. Okay, anybody else with any points? Yes, Maureen?
Just to comment on objective 2.2, which is connecting trails seamlessly across jurisdictional boundaries to link municipal parks, Crippen Park, Crown lands such as Mount Gardner and private land. I'm really happy to see that in the park plan. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so then we have a motion then to adopt as amended.
As amended.
I'll even
Second.
Any more discussion before I call the question? All in favor? So done.
Didn't ask for a vote.
Opposed?
I don't like the environmental conservation parts that are in there.
So I will note that Councilor Morris is opposed.
Yeah.
Melanie?
I'm support, I'm in.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Bonnie, for all
Thank
your
you,
work.
Bonnie.
Yeah, thank you. Very good.
Yeah, you need to record that somewhere. Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah, the big tick.
Thank you very much.
First, we're getting details.
Two big ticks today. Okay, Metro Vancouver Director, I believe, is up next.
Everybody needs to.
That's a bigger deal than
Don't
you
take it
thought.
personally.
I'm not taking it personally. Okay, so Metro has met, I've been to two Metro meetings since we last met. The Parks Committee met on the 15th of March, and the board met on Friday, March the 23rd. The open meeting for Parks on the 15th really was a recap of the branding initiative that they had undertaken for their 50th year. And there was some lovely documentation on branding that they're going to circulate more broadly, and I'll circulate it to the rest of council. There's also a very nice little video on Crippen Park that's now posted on the Metro website. They're doing short videos that introduce the public to all of the parks in the system, and they're quite charming. The substantive point that was in the parks agenda was the acquired building management program policy. And this is a policy that's been in development for some time because Metro is struggling with having 345 acquired buildings throughout the system, and they're all in various states of repair, disrepair, occupancy, lack of occupancy. So they are sorting that out, and the gist of it is that they're going to develop a program that provides direction for all of the acquired buildings on regional park sites. Principals follow the regional parks plan vision of protecting natural areas, connecting people to nature. This is interesting. It should prevent future acquired building issues through an evaluation of the building's age, designation, uses and condition, and provide direction for future building management. So the gist of this is that Metro staff really works largely in a policy vacuum when it comes to the buildings that are within the park, and this is intended to apply to all of the existing and to future acquired buildings in the system, both the heritage ones and the non-heritage designated buildings. There are up to 70 potential heritage designation buildings in that group of 345 acquired buildings. So it's problematic system-wide, and they're trying to deal with it. With the Metro board, lots going on in closed. In the open meeting, probably most relevant for this group, is the next phase of the transit-oriented affordable housing study is beginning. and they're going to be looking more closely at Canadian examples for affordable housing. They looked quite a lot to the States for the first iteration of this housing study. And one of the recommendations was that they look to Ontario, where inclusionary zoning and rental-only zoning are being used and have been used for a little while. So there might be some useful information to inform the local study.
What's inclusionary zoning?
That's where, for example, here we've got 50% of the square footage goes to affordable housing. And then I have proposed a resolution as an on-table item, so it's in your package. It's 11.1A, and I'll read it as it's not in the circulated agenda. Whereas Metro Vancouver Regional Parks is proceeding with its parks acquisition strategy, Bowen Island Municipal Council formally confirms its expressed interest in exploring options with regional parks for the potential expansion of Crippen Regional Park to include some or all of the Crown lands on Bowen Island.
Second.
So, as you know, there has been ongoing work done by Metro staff on developing a park acquisition strategy and also getting the money to be able to acquire some parks and looking at other opportunities to expand the current system or for future parks. And there has been past interest expressed by the Metro staff in looking at Crippen, and more recently there has been a request that Bowen Council formally confirm its interest in having the conversation. So that's the intent of the resolution.
So that is moved and seconded. For discussion, any discussion on this one?
Not quite straightforward.
Okay. All in favor? That's passed unanimously, Melanie?
Yep.
Thank you. I know sitting at the other end of the phone how tough it is to suddenly jump back into the second notice.
So
Yes, Maureen.
I have an appointment scheduled tomorrow with Mike Redpath, who's the Director of Parks, and I can pass on the resolution at that time, and he will include this in the April 18th Parks agenda package.
Okay, great.
And thank you to David Hawking for setting the ball rolling in part on this.
This relates to David and the Defend Island Forests Group having been invited by Metro Vancouver Parks, and to reassure Metro Vancouver Parks that we support their initiative and their presentation. I wonder if we might want to recommend that Bowen Island Council encourage Defend Island Forest to continue their efforts to prevent industrial logging on Bowen Island's Crown land, or support, or something. Because they've been doing all kinds of good work, and this initiative is now coming forward, partly through their work. So couldn't we say that we encourage them, or we...
Don't we need a notice in writing of the resolution 24 hours in advance of the meeting?
Yeah, I think, that's pretty, given the time and given the
Okay.
potential desires to change wording and all that
All
sort
right,
of
I'll bring it
stuff.
to the next meeting.
Yeah.
Sure,
We can,
please.
Tyler, note that as a notice of motion.
Yeah,
I can help you with the wording with the minutes afterwards.
yeah, I don't have enough brain power left right now.
And the wording was that council encouraged Defend
I'll send
Island
it to you.
Forest. You'll send it to me?
We should have it right now if it's a notice. of
Okay.
motion.
Do we need it as a notice of
Be it
motion?
resolved that Bowen Island Municipal Council encourage Defend Island Forests to continue their efforts to prevent industrial logging on Bowen Island's Crown lands.
All right.
Okay, so moving on to the Islands Trust reports.
Oh, I better go first, because then Andrew can go home. You're sitting here, yeah. Andrew raised the question, so in your package is the notice and the news release from the Allen's Trust approving the 2018-2019 budget, which is an increase to $293,000 for the requisition from Bowen, and last year's requisition was some $243,000. So it is a significant increase. How it's calculated is set out in the Allen's Trust Act as our proportionate share based on assessed values of the whole Isles Trust area and our particular assessed values. That number over the years was 13% when we incorporated it back in the 2000, which was the first requisition. It's now up to 18%. So that accounts for sort of part of the reason for the increase. The other is that legislation also says we pay a proportionate share of the trust fund board and of the Islands Trust Council. We don't pay any share of the Island Trust planning. And how those two numbers are calculated is largely just the two function areas. And there's an agreement, a protocol, a policy statement which we agreed to, which sets out which numbers go in there. There really hasn't been any interest at the Financial Planning Committee to reopen that agreement and look to taking things out or changing things around. And most of those expenses are very clearly arguable related to trust-wide. Some of the things like the communications consultant and some of the other functions where they're serving both local planning, their salaries are allocated. The same with the trust executive salary. Part of it's allocated to local planning and part of it's allocated to the trust. So the formula is pretty well set in stone. They take out election costs. We don't pay for a share of the other elections. There's some small tweaking that staff has done along the way, and they've given us as much as possible. One of the things that changes from one year to the next is what sort of special projects happen and whether they fall under local planning or trust projects, trust area wide. And this year, there was some under local projects and not, and some under trust, and then the allocation of the draw from the reserves wasn't enough to wipe out everything that was added into the trust projects. So I've been through it and can't find anything else to draw it down. Next year, if there's no trust for programs committee projects, it could go way down. It's a yo-yo.
Good question, Andrew. I wasn't on Islands Trust in 2013, so I don't have anything to add, but maybe you do, because I think you were an Islands trustee in 2013. But anyway, I was just going to report that we met 2 weeks ago on Salt Spring Island and passed these budgets, so there'll be a list of what we did coming out shortly. Last week, I went to the Ocean Protection Plan Dialogue Forum downtown. It was a 2-day event, so I sat with Claire and Chair Peter Luckham was there at different times. They moved us around among the tables, so I talked about Howe Sound. And so they were there representing the whole trust area, the kind of thing that that Islands Trust does, including, for all the islands, including Bowen. And last week I also went to the Freshwater Forum that the Islands Trust put on in Cowichan Bay. And again, different trustees and groups that run water systems and interested people from and staff from the different Islands Trust islands. So those kinds of things are going on, and they're the kinds of things that Bowen Island also benefits from. That's the end of my report.
Okay. I have one question then for Ida. Given the fact that the island's going to have a 20% increase in its requisition this year over last year, it goes really from 243, should I say, to 293 in round figures. It's a 20% increase. Now, you know, a 20% kind of beats inflation, even today, Violet. And I guess the question is, to the bigger audience, we talk a lot about transparency and for the general public. If I was going to give someone a 20% increase on their bill, I might like to issue a statement which to some extent explains and gives the rationale. So My question very simply is, for better or for worse, and there's obviously reasons for everything, is a statement going to come out for general circulation in a language that most people can understand, because so much of this is done either in statute or by formula. Is there a statement going to be issued by Island Trust to people on Bowen explaining the 20% increase? And that's all I'm asking. Is something going to be
They
forthcoming?
did that in the budget consultation package.
They did?
Yeah.
Is this something, well, let me put it this way, is there going to be something widely circulated that maybe explains in language that people can understand easily, that explains a 20% increase?
I can take line by line number changes and add them up and say, you know, this line went up by this and this line went up by that, and therefore our 18% of that increase. That's really the only way to do it.
So it's really our share of the plots that
Of
we
the whole
show
plot.
of Island Trust.
It's our share of a page-long list of chartered accounts.
Okay, all right. Well, that then is what will have to be the answer.
Yeah.
The answer is there isn't, unless you want it line by line.
Yeah.
It's a fact. It's just expenses of the Island Trust have risen significantly, and these are our allotted share.
And the ones that we share in have risen more than the ones that the local planning, so the total increase in the Islands Trust expenditure is one number, but local planning's gone down and this one's gone up. So we share in this one. So, and that means, yeah.
I take Michael's point. I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile for me to talk with their CAO about getting even something that can be circulated to the community.
Well, we can pull the things out of the budget news release, and I can talk to the new chief financial officer, and we can, but it is, sometimes in previous years, expenses have stayed relatively the same, just in inflation cost in all the categories. And it's been very simple because it's just been the projects, and it's been able to say, Bowen's got a 10% increase. There was a $300,000 project for trust programs, trust area services, and our share of that adds to the, roughly to the 10,000. That doesn't work this year.
I would welcome any easy to understand,
Yeah.
circulable explanation to the public at large.
One of the things that came up at the last communications team meeting was
It did actually.
the value of having a one-pager
Yeah.
dealing with Metro Vancouver and what was involved.
Yeah, I saw that.
And one-pager on the Islands Trust. So those are they're in the works.
Yeah.
That would be welcome. I'm glad that if it is, I thank you. Because right now, I find the explanation a little hard to give, because it's somewhat technical. And frankly, people, okay, and the word is getting out now that it's nearly 300,000 this year as an island, and as this carries on, in 3 years, it'll be $1 million. Because that's
the simple question that has to be answered is, what do we get for our 300,000?
I was going to follow that, and I thought, one gentle step at a time. But since you've been so kind as to raise it,
that's all.
Let me just go.
That's all.
Stab myself in the heart right now.
Yes,
Guys, do we have to get back into this one?
Try a pen. It's more
Just don't throw it.
No.
This is a topic that we could have ad nauseum. So please, let's move on. Anything else in the way of Islands Trust report? Okay, quick report from the mayor on TransLink. We received at our meeting this piece of paper.
Nice.
This piece of paper says that this law is repealed, and the law that is repealed is the law that required a referendum for transit expenditures, any new tax for transit. This is a very, very big deal to the mayors of Metro Vancouver, I'll tell you. There was cause for celebration that thing has been repealed. Because if any of you remember our half-point gain or increase in the provincial sales tax that was so soundly defeated and had led to all manner of repercussions. Anyway, That's all we really talked about. No. That's all I can tell you about.
Well, there's been all sorts of stuff in the news.
I know.
Is that a new item on the agenda?
That is.
Yep,
that's 11.4.
Zip that in.
Report from,
11.4.
report from Mayor on TransLink.
In the, I think we used to have a standing agenda item called report from Mayor's Council.
Yeah.
in the past.
So did we miss 11.3?
No, we're getting there.
We're
got there
You're
yet.
next.
What?
Next
You're
up,
next.
we have 11.3.
Okay, sorry. I heard 11.4, so I was getting a bit confused.
Well, I'm confused.
Anyway, not to worry.
Isn't Melanie on?
This
Can't
is,
tell?
this is,
11.3.
this is Melanie, but Melanie is up
It's
now.
now 11.4.
Well, it wasn't an item removed from the consent agenda.
Sorry.
No.
No.
It's an
Melanie.
on-table
We
item.
we can put me at 11.4 now as out of order, okay? So the on-table item that Melanie has emailed to us, and I assume is in our agenda.
Letter of support.
It's the very last
Yeah.
page
For the
of your
Smart
operating
Cities
plan.
Challenge.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Why is that not a new on-table item?
It is.
It is the
Well,
very
I'm
last-
sorry, new business.
Because I think we had it before.
It is under new business, 11.3.
We should, I think Allison's point is we technically should have put it under business around.
Or no, well, in my agenda, new business is, oh, hang on, I've got the wrong
Okay.
We're driving away our audience.
We have the ability to do that.
one. New business is
So,
usually, yeah.
We reordered the agenda to have new business start at the beginning of the meeting. That's why the numbering is
Just to
unfamiliar.
confuse me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So the issue here is council endorsed the request for a letter of support under the mayor's signature to support the Bowen municipality's submission to the Smart Cities Challenge. And so it says something here, this document should clearly demonstrate the commitment of community leadership to the outcome set out in the challenge statement. Have we done that, Melanie?
I put it in that, in the email.
Well, but the resolution doesn't say what the challenge statement is.
Right now I'm just looking for approval, support, what's the word, sorry,
Endorse.
Are you principal or?
yeah, because I didn't want to come out completely with a final outcome because we're still in public engagement. We're still asking the community to submit ideas. So I just wanted to make sure that council was still supportive of the project, because if they're not, then there's no more point in continuing on with putting an application in. But my hope is that I'd be able to bring a draft to the April 9th council meeting.
Okay.
That's good.
Well,
Melanie, then I would suggest maybe this is premature, just to get council's endorsement, and that can be part of what we bring forward on April 9th.
Yeah, I just wanted, maybe if I could just get council's just endorsement of the project. Because if council's not supportive of it, then there's no more point putting any more work in. So it was just kind of, yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Well, of course, we don't know what the project is, right?
So it is along the lines of what we put into the strategic plan. It will be, it's more likely to be centered around a rural mobility app.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's about improving transportation for the island.
I can't imagine us not supporting, if somebody goes to all the trouble of entering the contest, I can't imagine us not supporting the entry, particularly when it's something that is so well geared to the challenge that is put forward. I'm going to go to Maureen for a second, though she'd like to speak on this.
Hi, Melanie. I'm wondering if a motion along the lines of that council support in principle Bowen Island municipalities' participation in the Smart Cities Challenge. I wonder, would that work for you?
Yes, yeah.
I think we already have a resolution.
Yeah, it's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done that already, I believe, Melanie. And we're not changing our mind.
It's in the strategic plan.
Yeah.
How much is this all gonna cost
Yeah,
us?
it's
Yeah,
a
between now
financial
and April the
obligation.
9th, I guess is my question.
Sorry?
Is there any, how
Financial
much
obligation.
staff time and financial outlay is there
There's
between
no
now and
financial
April?
outlay, and the only staff time going forward would be perhaps just some help putting the actual document together, like desktopping, and so maybe 1 or 2 hours. And I believe Kathy offered some help on answering one of the questions.
Okay.
So the outcome would be, I mean, hopefully, it would be hopeful that we would become maybe a shortlisted community, and that would then that would come with a $250,000 grant, and then the ultimate prize would be $5 million. But you know, one step at a time, sort of thing.
Yeah, okay, we won't jump
Very
in
good.
yet. Okay, so is that okay then, Melanie, if we just leave it at that? Because we are continuing to be supportive of it. You will be bringing something more formal to the next meeting.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Items removed from consent agenda, 3.7.
Okay,
Is that me?
that's me. This is 3.7, the Shaw Cable, Cape Roger Curtis to Vancouver Island. And I was just going to ask if, I'm fine with the recommendation, it just occurs to me that, and through some people I talked to, that it's going to cut through eelgrass beds on both sides. And I'm pretty sure,
Just a sec, which one are we dealing with?
3.7,
This is a crown line
Oh, we got the
referral.
wrong agenda again.
Yeah.
This is- that's
There's
fine.
Shaw Cable.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure, they have to do the same
So
investigation.
it's going to go through, well, I looked at the big environmental report that came with it.
Oh.
It'll go through eelgrass at the Cape Roger Curtis end and at the other end. And so I'm wondering if there's some eelgrass habitat compensation or mitigation, or I think there's a no net loss policy. So there might be some dollars in lieu, and I just wondered if we might ask staff to include that question, because there are places where that could use that kind of habitat restoration, eelgrass habitat restoration funding in Howe Sound, including probably Bowen.
Would that not be through the Finbro process though, as opposed to ours?
I think it doesn't always appear unless it's asked for.
Are you, any?
So I think, yeah, council wants to note that the potential loss of eelgrass habitat, and you know, want to ensure no net.
No net loss? Yeah.
Now, is that a council thing, or is it simply a matter of staff informing them that noted in the environmental report is the loss of eelgrass?
I think I would prefer having some council comment, because when I did the review, like for docks, here we have it specifically in our bylaw, we say there's no negative impact. But that's specific to, when I was looking through it, specific to private mortgage facility, group mortgage facility, community dock, whereas we just say public utility, private utility is permitted,
Yeah.
full stop.
Okay, when do you have to have your letter or note back to them?
It's like by later this week.
So where in this form would you put this?
So this is something that we would have to formulate a resolution to at this meeting?
I mean, I guess it would be resolved that council has no objection to the application, but would request no negative or something like that.
Yeah, could we say, be it resolved that council has no objection to the application and requests no net loss of eelgrass in Howe Sound waters, or something like that,
As a result of this project.
as a result of the project.
You request no net loss of eelgrass as a result of this
Yeah,
process.
Eelgrass or eelgrass habitat?
eelgrass,
No negative impact of eelgrass habitat?
yeah,
Or there will be compensation for any negative impact of eelgrass
no net
habitat?
loss on eelgrass habitat as a result of this project.
No net loss, you mean, so if there was some loss there, they'd make it up somewhere else?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the theory, but if, I don't want to belabor this.
It may mean that they
But will the
replant or
habitat
that they, you know,
It'll
fix
come
it.
back, won't it? In other words, once they bury the cable and they put the same seafloor back in over top of it, doesn't the eelgrass grow back again?
No, not all the time, it doesn't.
No.
It depends on what they cover it with, and it depends, I mean, there's lots of schemes out there for replanting eelgrass habitat that's been disturbed, because it doesn't come back easily by itself. That's partly why
Okay.
it's threatened.
Can I ask ask a question?
Yep.
Suan, are you asking that there's no net loss within the project area or just within Bowen Island waters?
Project area, I think.
Sorry?
I think within the project area is a good way to put it.
In that case, can we also add that no, and all precautions are taken to protect glass reef sponges?
They do that, that's already covered.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And there aren't any right there.
Yeah, they showed the root and the sponges and all that, so.
Yeah, but in the report it says that there's actually no regulation that says that they must.
Oh.
You're talking about Daniel's report?
No, in one of
The big environmental
consultant's reports.
Yeah. Okay, request that no net loss to eelgrass habitat and glass sponge reefs within the project area.
Can I ask, have they started work on this yet?
They have started work in terms of they put the cross island, I believe all the way along, they put the like the box in at the road end.
Yeah.
And I think I'm not sure they've completed, but they have tenure for the portion that comes in at the end of Cardina.
So is the deal, to all intents and purposes, completely sure that now they just have to do the work? Do we
I mean,
have
this is the next step for them to do, is to have this tenure in place.
Except?
So the next step.
Oh, sorry,
for them,
that's a big one, yeah.
is to have this tenure in place to complete their length, yeah.
Then they'll be underwater.
Okay, I suppose it should be considered, yeah. My apologies. You wanted to speak to this, Maureen?
Yeah, just briefly. I don't think we should lose sight of what this signifies, which is really, really important for the island.
Yes, yeah.
Internet connectivity at a very, very high level.
I'll tell you, this is a massive capital project, right? I'm sympathized. I hope we don't lose any eelgrass. But I'm asking for a sense of scale here. I'm sorry to introduce stuff at this stage. I just can't support it. If you get the deal done, let them do their work. If it was someone who I thought was going to be crass and irresponsible, I'd be climbing all over this, but I don't. Right?
If I could just jump in for a sec. I mean, all we're doing is request no net loss of eelgrass habitat, right? They're not going to not put this thing in because we've requested there be no net
Well,
loss.
I guess we've requested they could always turn us down. But
Yeah.
if we ask, yes, let's ask. Let's ask nicely.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Then why don't we just, the council request that the applicant consider and be mindful of the eelgrass
Yeah.
in their project.
Our experience of dealing with this company has been that when we've asked quietly, we've tended to make considerable progress. We have a good relationship with them, so why don't we ask?
I think actually it's the province that has the funding and the policy of no net loss. So all I'm saying is that this is Adam Taylor that I sent a copy of this big, huge environmental report because I thought it might be of interest to him, and this was his suggestion, that there are projects such as when derelict boats damages our shores and things like that, that need mitigation. And if there are BC dollars, sometimes they don't always get spent if people don't ask for it.
So this isn't the applicant that would be doing this is the province. So can that be a totally separate resolution then? Because it's nothing to do with them issuing a permit.
Sure, it can be a separate one if you want to say that.
Well, down at the next meeting, when it can be properly worded in the section of the program referred to.
It has to go back. Daniel needs this meeting, I think.
No, but
No,
this has nothing to do with the application. It's to do with a funding program from the province.
No.
I suppose since I'm chairing this meeting, I should
This
try
moves-
to take this under control.
I move that whereas Bowen Island Municipality has received a referral from Mifflin for Crown Land application file number 268821, located at Cape Roger Curtis Lane, in relation to the license of occupation for a submarine cable. Therefore, be it resolved that council has no objection to the application and request no net loss to eelgrass habitat or glass sponge reefs within the project area.
Forget the glass sponge reefs, we know there's none there. So why complicate it with something that doesn't exist, right? We could add things to that.
They are there in the environmental report, and as Melanie pointed out.
They are.
They're there, and they're marked on the map. The route that's marked in the environmental report goes near them, and they're mentioned in the environmental report, saying that they don't want to go there, but that doesn't, and they're also asking for a 200-meter wide thing. They're gonna narrow it down to 100 meters, so they're not exactly sure where they're gonna go.
Like Murray says, they're gonna
Within
do it
the
anyway,
project
so
area.
just do it, yeah,
That's what I mean.
yeah. Second.
Or glass fine.
Could I hear the last part of that again?
Sure. And request no net.
From
Oh,
Tyler,
sure.
please.
Did we include the glass?
I
As much
believe
as
we
so.
have.
Sure. why not?
Therefore, be it resolved, the council has no objection to the application and requests the applicant ensure no net loss of eelgrass habitat and glass sponge reefs in the Howe Sound Waters project area as a result of this project.
I was gonna keep it a little more open and not say the applicant.
Okay.
And just leave that out, so it just says request no net loss.
Sure,
Okay.
all right.
I don't know.
Would you like me to read it again?
Habitat sponge reef.
Yes, please. Therefore, be it resolved that council has no objection to the application and requests no net loss of eelgrass habitat and glass sponge reefs in the Howe Sound Waters project area as a result of this project.
How do you read
I think
that?
it just said in the project area, but
Yeah. Tighten up the end.
Okay. And glass sponge reefs in the project area, right?
As a result.
Oh, are we gonna put in the as a result?
no, just in the project
Yeah, I
project
mean,
area.
as a
period.
result is pretty self-evident.
Yeah,
We wouldn't be
thank you.
saying it
Thank you,
anyway.
Amy.
Okay, does someone move that? Seconded?
I second it.
Okay, anyone want to speak about it? Good.
I'd like the motion severed, please.
How would you like it severed, madam? Oh, first of all, just up to no objection to the
Yeah,
application?
Yeah.
Okay, severing is fine, we're going to vote first of all on the first part of it. And all those in favor? Okay, that is passed, and those opposed? Okay, second part.
Okay, Melanie?
Yeah, I'm in support.
Okay.
Okay, and the second half of it. All
That
those-
council requests no net loss to eelgrass and.
Right. All those in favor? Okay, and those opposed?
I just don't see how you have it.
I'm in favor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is
Practically
passed.
worded.
And not the issue of my life. So, due to the lateness of the hour, I am pulling a few things from this agenda. We will defer them until the next agenda. However, there are two things that we should deal with. 3.17 refers to the Cove Bay Water Treatment Plant. Who wanted to pull that?
I did, and it's a quick one. This is just related to, I looked at at their minutes, and I looked at their agenda, and it didn't appear that they had been, any mention, or they had, the council back in July approved a resolution saying that for the new water treatment plant, that these climate change reports should be referred to, because they referred to the dry, it's getting longer, drier. Anyway, none of this was referred to the, or if it was referred to the Cove Bay water system, it wasn't done through this meeting or in the agenda. And that this was there was no other meeting that I know of.
So they are an advisory committee, they're not a management committee anymore, so they're not dealing with the specifics of the.
Okay. All right.
But
It's
that
just
has
that-
been referred to the relevant staff who are
Okay,
assigned to.
because Daniel had asked me for it again the other day, and I just wondered if it had gone around. So I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think it's not, Daniel's not involved, but it has been referred to our.
Okay, I'll send it to Daniel.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's it.
Okay, so then we can read this, or the recommendation as written in 3.17 of the agenda package.
Yep.
I could
That
have-
council directs staff to hire an outside consultant to perform an external review to confirm the findings of the pilot treatment plant study conducted by Opus International Consultants Canada Limited.
Right.
I'll move that.
Okay, a seconder. Okay, and any discussion before I call the question?
Just a point. I would like to see an updated timeline for this project, if that's at all possible. Thank you.
Yeah, the hold up to this point.
It's okay, I don't need an explanation.
Okay,
Just
fair enough.
like a timeline. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just a request.
All in favor? Okay, and that is passed. And the other item that is time sensitive, 3.20B EDC plan and budget.
Well, I pulled that because it's their work plan, but I also pulled it because I'm not sure what the wording of the resolution. Are we telling them they got $25,000? Or is it just being included in the draft budget that we're going to?
We could revise the motion to read direct staff to allocate $25,000 in the proposed 2018 budget. That was what was intended.
Okay. So the question on that one is this something that is done every year?
Yes.
It has been. We allocated 25 to the EDC.
Okay.
In the past, you reallocated. This year, I made it part of the base budget, so there is a provision included in the budget for the 25,000.
Okay.
Yeah, but I guess the other question is, we've had the public information meetings, nobody showed up, but there has been some comments about the increase. So, just sort of, yeah, do we give them, and is there no carry forward? They've spent their whole budget a lot in the last year because of the hours.
They certainly did not.
They didn't spend it, but because it's become part of the base budget, whatever wasn't spent will fall to surplus.
Okay.
So it won't be carried forward anymore.
Good.
Okay, so.
So I will, am I moving this recommendation?
Sure.
then?
Yeah.
That council endorse the 2018 Economic Development Committee work plan, and that council directs staff to allocate $25,000 in the proposed 2018 economic development, the proposed 2018 budget to the Economic Development Committee. That's kind of garbled, sorry.
All you need to do is add in the proposed 2018 budget at the end of the
Yeah.
resolution.
Yeah.
That's written.
To the Economic Development Committee.
2019 budget.
Yes.
Second that.
Okay.
And did 3.220A pass on consent?
Yes, I just pulled
That
it.
wasn't pulled.
You were just pulling
Thank
B?
you.
Yeah, I only pulled B.
Right. Okay, so all in favor? And that is passed. Is it unanimous, Melanie?
Sir, yeah, in favor.
Okay, thank you. So, the balance of these items then will then be deferred to our next meeting unless somebody feels that something is extremely time sensitive.
We gotta catch it, Terry.
You have 9 minutes.
Excuse me, 3.1.8, did that pass on consent? No, it did not.
This is a Greenway.
3.18.
Sorry, no, that's not the right one.
I pulled.
Never mind.
I don't have anything else outstanding on my list.
I pulled the part because it was because of the work.
By the way, listen to CKNW on your way out, because apparently there's going to be an announcement on the...
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Excellent. What time?
It didn't say, wait a second, what did Bruce say? He
We
said-
are adjourned.
Sounds
Okay.
So Tyler,